numbers at exactly 3:10 a.m. Not random errors, patterns. 3:33, 4:44, 11:11. Numbers that repeated, insisted, demanded attention. I changed the batteries. I unplugged it and plugged it back in. The next night at 3:10, the same thing happened. That was also the first night I noticed the car. A sedan, dark blue or black, impossible to tell in the darkness, parked across the two-lane highway on the gravel shoulder near mile marker 47. No headlights, no interior light. Just a shape, and inside that shape, a darker shape still. A silhouette. Someone sitting behind the wheel, facing the store, facing me. I told myself it was a traveler who'd pulled over to sleep. Arizona highways are long and people get tired, but travelers don't sit perfectly still for 47 minutes. Travelers don't return the next night, and the night after that, always at the same time, always in the same position. And travelers don't watch. Tonight the clock reads 2:58, 12 minutes. I busy myself straightening the candy bars at the register, arranging them by color because arranging them by anything else feels wrong. My hands are steady. I've gotten good at pretending. The store is empty, as it always is at this hour. The aisles stretch out behind me like the ribs of some enormous beast, their contents illuminated by the relentless overhead lights. Chips, crackers, motor oil, antifreeze, mundane objects that should feel ordinary but somehow don't. Not at this hour. Not anymore. I hear it before I see anything change. A whisper, faint, like breath against glass, coming from the beverage aisle at the far end of the store. The refrigerators hum there, their compressors working overtime against the desert heat that seeps in even at night. But this sound isn't mechanical. It has texture, intention. I don't move. I've learned not to move when it starts. The whisper comes again, closer now, and I can almost make out words. Almost. It's like listening to a conversation through water. The rhythm is there, the cadence of speech, but the meaning drowns before it reaches me. My fingers tighten on a Snickers bar. The wrapper crinkles loud enough to make me flinch. 3:07, 3 minutes. The motion sensors in the back corner of the store activate, flooding the stockroom doorway with light. Nothing's there. Nothing I can see, but the light stays on for 43 seconds. I count them, before switching off again. I look down at the candy bar in my hand. I've crushed it without realizing, chocolate and nougat oozing through my fingers like something organic. 3:10. The clock behind me begins to flicker. I don't turn around. I don't need to. I can feel the light on my back, pulsing in a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. Or maybe my heartbeat has learned to match it. The whispers rise, then fall, then stop entirely. And outside, in the darkness beyond the parking lot, the car is there. I don't know when I decided that tonight would be different. Maybe it was yesterday, when I found the word spelled out in soup cans at the end of aisle 4. Leave. I hadn't stocked them that way. The morning shift manager hadn't either, I asked casually, trying not to sound like someone whose grip on reality was slipping. He just shrugged and said the overnight inventory sometimes got shifted around, but soup cans don't shift themselves into words. Or maybe it was the night before that, when I caught my reflection in the glass door and saw someone standing behind me. Just for a moment, just long enough to turn and find nothing there. The store had been empty. The cameras, when I checked the footage, showed only me, alone, frozen in place, staring at a door with nobody behind it. The cameras. That's another thing. They freeze now, every night, right around 3:10. Just static, then black, then normal again 20 minutes later. The security company says it's a glitch. I've stopped calling them. Tonight the car is there, and I'm not staying inside. I pull on my jacket even though it's still 70 degrees outside. The weight of it feels like protection, like armor, though I know it isn't. The bell above the door chimes as I push through, that same sharp, tinny sound. And then I'm standing in the parking lot, the store's light at my back, the void of the highway ahead. The car doesn't move. The distance between us is maybe 200 feet. I can see the silhouette now, clearer than before, a shadow against the slightly lighter darkness of the desert sky. Whoever is inside hasn't moved, hasn't reacted to the door opening, to me stepping outside, to my footsteps on the cracked asphalt as I start walking toward the road. The air smells like creosote and something else, something faintly metallic like old pennies or blood. My boots crunch on gravel as I reach the highway's edge. The white line dividing the lane seems brighter than it should be, as if the paint is new, though I know it hasn't been touched in years. I step over it. The walk across feels longer than it should. The car seems to recede even as I approach, the distance stretching like taffy, until suddenly I'm there, standing 3 feet from the driver's side door, close enough to touch the handle if I reached out. The window is down. The seat inside is empty. I don't understand what I'm seeing. My mind rebels against it, tries to construct explanations. The person inside got out while I was walking, slipped away into the darkness, but there's no sound of footsteps, no movement anywhere. And on the driver's seat, illuminated by the faint glow from the store across the highway, there's a photograph. I reach in before I can think better of it. My fingers close on the glossy paper, and I pull it into the light. It's a picture of the store, my store, taken from this exact angle, this exact distance. The timestamp in the corner reads a date from 8 years ago. And standing in the parking lot, frozen mid-step, is a man I don't recognize. He's looking at the car, at this car. His expression is difficult to read. Fear, maybe, or exhaustion, or the blank resignation of someone who has stopped trying to understand. He's wearing a jacket like mine. His build is similar to mine. He's walking toward the car. I flip the photograph over. On the back, written in faded ballpoint pen, are 3 words: "Don't come back." The store looks different when I return. Nothing I can point to, nothing specific. The shelves are still there, the fluorescent lights still buzzing, the clock behind the counter still showing the wrong time. But the air has changed. It feels thicker now, heavier, like walking through something that doesn't want me there. I start looking for the clues. I don't know what makes me think of them as clues, but the word feels right. The photograph implies someone was here before me, someone who experienced what I'm experiencing, someone who tried to leave a warning. If there's one message, there might be others. I find the first one in the stockroom, behind a case of motor oil that's been sitting in the same spot since I started working here. A piece of paper, yellowed with age, taped to the wall where nobody would think to look. The handwriting is cramped, urgent. 3:10 is when it notices you. Once it notices, it doesn't stop. I've tried everything. Quitting didn't work. Moving didn't work. It followed me to Phoenix, to Flagstaff, to my mother's house in Tucson. There's only one thing I haven't tried. The note ends there. I read it 3 times, my hands trembling so badly the paper rattles. Then I continue searching. The second message is scratched into the underside of a shelf in aisle 2, near the canned goods. I have to lie on my back to see it, staring up at the metal like I'm stargazing. It's not in the car. The car is bait. It wants you to cross. My throat tightens. I already crossed. The third message is the hardest to find. It's written in permanent marker on the inside of the bathroom mirror. Not the front, but the back, visible only because the corner of the mirror has started to separate from the wall. Whoever wrote it must have pried the whole thing off and replaced it. I think I know what it is now. I think it's the road itself. The highway. Something happened here, at mile marker 47. Something that left a wound that won't close. And every few years, it needs someone new to pick at it. A witness. A watcher. Now you're watching the watcher, and that makes you part of it. That makes you next. I stumble back from the bathroom. The lights flicker, all of them, throughout the entire store. And for just a moment, I hear the whispers again. Clearer this time. Close enough that I can finally make out what they're saying. They're saying my name. It's 4:17 a.m. when the morning shift manager arrives. He finds me sitting behind the counter, the photograph in my lap, the notes spread out around me like evidence of something I can't prove. He asks if I'm okay. I tell him I'm fine. He doesn't look convinced, but he doesn't push. People don't push in places like this. Everyone carries their own weight of strangeness, their own secrets. I drive home as the sun comes up, the Arizona desert shifting from black to purple to gold around me. The highway stretches endlessly ahead, familiar and yet not. I pass mile marker 47. I don't look at it. I don't need to. But in my rearview mirror, just for a second, I see a car parked on the shoulder. Dark. Still. A silhouette behind the wheel. I blink, and it's gone. Maybe it was never there. Maybe it's always been there. Maybe the man in the photograph thought the same thing, 8 years ago, before he left his warnings and disappeared into whatever comes next. I have 3 hours before I need to sleep, and another shift tonight. Another chance to stand behind that counter and watch the clock tick toward 3:10. Another night of whispers and flickering lights, and the terrible certainty that something is watching me, studying me, waiting for me to make a choice I don't understand. The notes said quitting didn't work. They said moving didn't work. But they never said what did work. Whether there's an ending to this at all, or just an infinite loop of watchers watching watchers, each one leaving messages for the next, each one slowly realizing that the line between observer and observed has never existed. The sun is fully up now. The world looks normal. But I know better. Tonight at 3:10 the car will be there again, and I'm no longer certain which side of the glass I'm on. Story 2. The elevator always hesitates before the 10th floor. Not a mechanical stutter. I've checked the cables, the pulleys, the ancient motor that groans like something dreaming of collapse. No, this is different. It's the kind of pause that feels deliberate, as if the building itself is holding its breath, waiting to see if you'll change your mind. I've worked the night shift here for 11 months. 11 months of buffing marble floors that remember footsteps from decades I never lived through. 11 months of fluorescent lights that flicker in patterns I've started to recognize, though I couldn't tell you what they mean. The building is 112 years old, a Gothic revival monstrosity that squats on the corner of 2 streets I'd never heard of before I took this job. The kind of place that was probably beautiful once, before the city grew tall around it and left it drowning in shadow. The 10th floor has been closed for renovation since before I started. That's what the building manager told me during orientation, his eyes sliding away from mine like water off glass. Structural concerns, he said. Permits pending. Nothing to worry about. Just stay off that floor. He handed me a ring of keys that included every door in the building except the ones up there. I believed him, at first. The sound started around month 3. Footsteps in the ceiling above the 9th floor, measured and deliberate, pacing the same path over and over. I told myself it was pipes. Old buildings talk, that's what people say. They settle, they shift, they mumble to themselves in languages of rust and decay. But pipes don't stop walking when you stop to listen. Pipes don't pause at the same spot every night, right above the superintendent's old office, as if someone is standing there, looking down through layers of plaster and wire at whatever lies beneath. Then came the elevator. I'd be mopping the lobby at 3 in the morning, the building empty except for me and whatever rats had made their homes in the walls, and I'd hear it. The mechanical groan of cables, the whisper of the car ascending. I'd watch the brass needle above the doors, a relic from the building's original construction, all Art Deco flourishes and oxidized elegance. And it would climb past 5, past 7, past 9. It would stop at 10. The doors would open, I knew, even though I couldn't see them. I could hear it, that pneumatic sigh of metal parting. Then nothing. Silence that felt like pressure against my eardrums. And after exactly 47 seconds, I counted. Every time I counted, the doors would close and the elevator would descend, empty. I started taking the stairs after that. The television was the last straw. Or maybe it was the first real warning, and I was just too stubborn to recognize it. I was on 9, replacing a light bulb in the hallway, when I heard it bleeding through the ceiling. Static. Not the clean white noise of a dead channel, but something textured, layered, like voices caught in amber, trying to push through from somewhere very far away. I pressed my ear to the ceiling, and I swear, I heard my own name. Not spoken, sung, a single note stretched thin as spider silk, wrapping around the syllables of who I am until they didn't sound like language anymore. That night, I went home and didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed and watched the sky lighten over the lake and told myself that I was tired. That 11 months of night shifts had finally caught up to me. That the human brain, deprived of sunlight and regular sleep, starts to fill silence with phantoms. I almost believed it. The dust on the door changed everything. I found it 3 nights ago, on my routine inspection of the 9th floor. The stairwell door to 10 is always locked. I've checked it 100 times, maybe more, the brass handle cold and unyielding under my palm. But that night, I noticed something I'd never seen before. A thin line of dust along the threshold, undisturbed except for one spot near the center where something had been drawn. Letters. My name. The letters shaky, childlike, traced by a finger I couldn't see belonging to a hand I didn't want to imagine. I stood there for a long time, long enough for the fluorescent light above me to flicker through its entire cycle twice. Long enough for the building to settle into its deepest silence, the kind that comes just before dawn when even the rats stop moving. I should have walked away. I should have finished my shift, clocked out, gone home to my apartment with its thin walls and thinner curtains and never come back. I could have found another job. There are always buildings that need cleaning, floors that need someone to push a mop across them in the small hours when the world forgets to watch. But my name was on that door. My name, written in dust that had no business being disturbed. And I needed to know who put it there. I came prepared tonight. Flashlight with fresh batteries. Phone fully charged, camera app open, ready to record. I told myself I was being rational, gathering evidence. If something was wrong with the 10th floor, squatters, vandals, some elaborate prank by tenants I'd never met, I'd have proof. I'd show the manager. I'd make him explain why a floor that's been closed for renovation shows signs of habitation. The elevator hesitated longer than usual. I felt it in my stomach, that moment of suspension, like the instant before a fall when gravity hasn't quite decided whether to claim you. Then the doors opened, and I stepped out into a hallway that shouldn't have existed. It looked wrong. Not dramatically, not obviously, but in the way a photograph looks wrong when it's been tilted 2 degrees off center. The proportions were subtly stretched, the ceiling slightly too high, the walls slightly too close. The carpet, a deep burgundy that had probably been fashionable 50 years ago, showed no footprints, no wear patterns, no evidence that anyone had walked here in decades. But I could smell something under the must and the dust, something alive, something waiting. I started recording. The first door was apartment 1001. I tried the handle, expecting resistance, expecting the same cold refusal I'd felt 100 times at the stairwell entrance. It opened easily, too easily. The hinges didn't creak. The door didn't stick. It swung inward like it had been waiting for exactly this moment, exactly this pressure, exactly this hand. The apartment was empty, not abandoned empty, with furniture left behind and personal effects scattered like shedskin. Truly empty. No carpet, no fixtures, no evidence that anyone had ever lived there at all. Just bare floors and bare walls and windows that looked out onto a city I didn't quite recognize. The buildings across the street were wrong. Too tall in some places, too short in others. The lights in their windows flickered in patterns that matched the fluorescence downstairs, and I felt something cold settle into the base of my spine. I backed out, closed the door, checked my phone to make sure it was still recording. The hallway had grown longer. I know how that sounds. I know the rational explanation. Disorientation, darkness, an unfamiliar space playing tricks on a tired mind. But I had counted the doors when I stepped off the elevator. 12 apartments per floor, 6 on each side. The same layout as every other floor in the building. I had counted 12. Now there were 14. The new doors were at the far end of the hall, past where the hallway should have terminated in a window overlooking the alley. They were identical to the others. Same brass numbers, same faded paint, same sense of patient waiting. 1013 and 1014. Numbers that didn't exist on the building's floor plan. Numbers that had no right to be there. I walked toward them anyway. I don't know why. I felt pulled. The way you feel pulled toward the edge of a high place. That terrible magnetism that whispers how easy it would be to just let go. The carpet was different here, newer, the burgundy deeper, richer, as if it had been laid yesterday. And there were footprints, not mine. I checked. I looked behind me at the trail of impressions I'd left in the dust, and they ended 6 feet back, at the threshold of the original hallway. These footprints came from the other direction, from the new doors, from whatever lay beyond them. They were my shoes, my exact shoes, the same brand, the same size, the same pattern of wear on the heel where I drag my left foot slightly when I'm tired. I stared at them for a long time, my phone shaking in my hand, the recording capturing nothing but darkness and the sound of my breathing. The door to 1013 was open, just a crack, just enough to let a sliver of light escape, pale and flickering like a television tuned to a dead channel. I pushed it open. The apartment was furnished, lived in. There was a couch against one wall, sagging in the middle the way couches sag when someone has spent too many nights sleeping on them. A coffee table cluttered with papers, with coffee cups, with a cell phone that looked exactly like mine, the same case. The same crack in the corner of the screen from when I dropped it in the stairwell last month. The television was on, static, but shapes moved within it, forms that were almost human, almost recognizable. I watched them, unable to look away, and I felt something in my chest twist like a key turning in a lock. There were photographs on the wall, Polaroids pinned in a crooked line, each one showing the same image. This hallway, this door, taken from slightly different angles, at slightly different times, by hands that must have held a camera exactly where I was holding my phone. The earliest photo showed 12 doors. The next showed 13, then 14, 15, 20. The last photograph in the line showed a hallway that stretched into darkness, doors lining both sides as far as the eye could see, and at the very end, barely visible, a figure standing with its back to the camera. Same uniform, same posture, same slight drag to the left foot visible even in stillness. I turned around. The hallway behind me had 18 doors now, and at the far end where the elevator should have been, there was only more hallway, stretching away into a darkness that the light from my flashlight couldn't penetrate. I've been walking for what feels like hours. My phone says it's been 17 minutes, but my phone also shows a battery percentage that hasn't changed since I stepped off the elevator, and a signal strength that reads full bars in a building that usually gives me nothing above the 3rd floor. The doors keep multiplying. Every time I look away, every time I check my phone or adjust my grip on the flashlight, there are more of them. Some are open now. Most are empty. That same terrible vacancy I found in 1001. But some of them have things inside. Furniture I recognize. Clothes I own. Notes written in handwriting that could be mine, if mine had grown shaky with exhaustion or fear or something worse. One apartment had a calendar on the wall. The month was right. The year was right. But all the days had been crossed out except one, and that one was circled in red, and next to it, in that shaky handwriting, someone had written, "He comes back tonight." Another apartment had a tape recorder on the kitchen counter, the kind I haven't seen since I was a kid. I pressed play. My voice came out of the speaker, thin and distorted, saying words I don't remember speaking. Don't go to the 10th floor. Don't go to the 10th floor. It repeats. It always repeats. Don't go to the 10th floor. I found 6 phones now. All of them mine. All of them recording. The hallway is different now. The walls are closer, the ceiling lower, the air thick with something that tastes like copper and static. I can hear footsteps behind me, matching my pace exactly. Stopping when I stop, starting when I start. I haven't turned around. I'm afraid of what I might see. I'm afraid it might be nothing. I'm afraid it might be me. The last door I found was different from the others. No number, no handle, just a smooth expanse of wood with my name carved into it in letters that looked like they'd been there for decades. The dust around the threshold was disturbed. Footprints leading in. Footprints leading in. None leading out. I'm standing in front of that door now. My hand is on the wood. It's warm. It shouldn't be warm. Nothing in this building is warm. Behind me, the footsteps have stopped. The static has stopped. Everything has stopped except the beating of my heart and the impossible, infinite patience of whatever waits on the other side of this door. My phone is still recording. My phone will always be recording. Somewhere in this hallway, in one of these impossible apartments, a future version of me will find this footage and watch it and understand nothing, and then he'll go looking for answers, and the floor will grow again, and the doors will multiply, and the cycle will continue because the cycle has always continued. I'm going to open the door. I've always been going to open the door. I think I've opened it before. The handle is cold now. The warmth is gone, replaced by that familiar brass chill that I've felt 100 times, 1,000 times, on doors that shouldn't exist in a building that shouldn't hold them. I can hear breathing on the other side. Even. Patient. Exactly like mine. The elevator dings somewhere behind me, impossibly far away, and I know without turning that the brass needle above its doors is climbing. Past 5, past 7, past 9, past 10, past 11. There is no 11th floor in this building. There wasn't a 10th floor either. Not really. Not until someone came looking for it. I think the floor creates itself. I think it grows from attention the way mold grows from damp. And I think everyone who comes up here, everyone who hears the footsteps and the static and sees their name written in dust, I think they all find this door eventually. I think they all stand where I'm standing, hand on the handle, phone recording, heart pounding. I think they all go inside. I don't know what happens after that. I don't know if they come out. I don't know if there's a they anymore, or if there's only ever been me, splitting and multiplying like the doors, like the hallway, like the floor itself. But I'm going to find out. I have to find out. The handle turns. Story 3. The cabin smells wrong. Not rotten, not moldy. Nothing I can name. It's the smell of a room that has been waiting. The kind of staleness that settles into a place when it has been holding its breath for too long, anticipating something that never arrives. Or perhaps something that always arrives, every single time. I've shown this property 43 times in the past 2 years. I know every warped floorboard, every draft that slips through the window frames, every groan the walls make when the mountain wind presses against them like a hand testing a door. I know this cabin the way you know the face of someone you've stopped trusting, intimately, and with growing unease. My colleagues at the agency stopped taking listings here 18 months ago. They'd laugh it off, call it the cursed cabin, but I noticed how their smiles never quite reached their eyes, how they'd find excuses, always excuses, whenever I asked someone to cover a showing for me. So I kept it. My listing. My problem. The pattern was always the same. A booking would come through, usually outdoor enthusiasts attracted by the isolation, the promise of unplugged solitude in the Colorado high country. They'd arrive on a Friday afternoon, send an enthusiastic text about the views, the quiet, the stars they were expecting to see. Then, sometime after midnight, my phone would light up with messages that made less and less sense. Questions about previous guests, complaints about sounds that couldn't exist in a cabin with no neighbors for 7 miles. And always, they'd be gone by morning, sometimes leaving belongings behind in their haste, sometimes not even stopping to collect their deposit. The explanations I received were maddeningly vague. Bad energy, something watching, a feeling. I stopped pressing for details after the 14th cancellation because the look in their eyes when I asked, that hollow, searching look, made me not want to know. So when my friend's brother and his crew of amateur paranormal investigators offered me $3,000 to spend a weekend filming here, I should have said no. I should have recognized my own desperation to prove something, to anyone, to myself, that there was nothing wrong with this cabin except superstitious guests and thin mountain air that plays tricks on sea-level lungs. Pride is a kind of blindness. I've learned that now. We arrived as the October sun was bleeding out across the western peaks, painting the aspens in shades of fire and dried blood. There were 4 of us. The brother, a lanky guy in his 30s who ran the channel. His cameraman, compact and perpetually adjusting equipment. A woman who handled audio and claimed to be sensitive to atmospheres. And me, the skeptic, the owner's representative, the man who had something to prove. They set up their equipment with practiced efficiency, while I walked through the cabin, checking the water heater, testing light switches, performing the rituals of normalcy that I clung to like prayer beads. The place looked the same as always: exposed beam ceilings, stone fireplace, windows that framed the mountain darkness like paintings of nothing. The furniture was sparse but functional. A couch the color of dried moss, a dining table scarred by decades of use, 4 chairs that didn't quite match. It was the cameraman who found the first note. He'd been checking the kitchen cabinets for establishing shots when he pulled open a drawer and went still. The quality of his silence made us all turn. He held up a piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, covered in handwriting that slanted downward as if the words were sliding off a cliff. The timestamp at the top read, September 14th, 2019. I felt something cold move through my chest. Not fear, not yet, but the precursor to fear, the way animals sense earthquakes before the ground begins to shake. I pulled out my phone and checked the booking records. September 2019, no reservations. The cabin had been empty that entire month. I remembered because I'd dropped the price twice trying to fill it. The brother read the note aloud, his voice steady but careful, the voice of someone who has trained themselves to narrate strange things. The writer described arriving at the cabin at sunset, described unpacking, making dinner, watching the darkness gather outside the windows, described how, sometime after 10, they began hearing footsteps on the wraparound porch, slow, deliberate, circling, how they'd turned on every exterior light and seen nothing, how the footsteps continued anyway. The note ended mid-sentence, and now I can hear it inside, in the walls, and I think... The audio woman found the second note in the bedroom closet, tucked into the pocket of a coat that had been hanging there for as long as I could remember. This one was dated March 7th, 2021. The booking system showed no guests that week either. This writer's handwriting was smaller, more controlled, but the content made my skin tighten across my skull. They described the same footsteps, the same circling. But this one went further. They wrote about finding a note in the kitchen drawer, left by someone who had apparently never existed. Someone describing the exact same experience. I watched the brother exchange glances with his crew. This was good footage for them, I understood. This was exactly what they'd come for. But I noticed how the cameraman kept the lens pointed away from himself, how the audio woman's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her equipment. They were professionals at performing calm. I was not. We found 11 more notes before the sun finished setting. They were everywhere, wedged behind the bathroom mirror, folded into the pages of an old paperback on the bookshelf, slipped between the mattress and box spring of the bed. Different handwriting, different dates spanning nearly a decade, but the same impossible story told over and over. The footsteps, the circling, the notes from people who came before, who should not have existed, describing what the current writer was experiencing as they wrote. And in every single note, a variation of the same final line. I am leaving this so the next person knows they are not imagining it. By the time darkness fully claimed the mountain, I had stopped checking the booking system. I already knew what it would tell me. The cabin's generator hummed beneath the floor, a heartbeat I'd never noticed before, steady and somehow wet-sounding, like something breathing through fluid. I sat at the dining table while the crew set up infrared cameras and audio recorders, their movements efficient but underlaid with a tension that hadn't been there when we arrived. The woman kept tilting her head as if listening to something just beyond the range of normal hearing. The cameraman wiped his palms on his jeans every few minutes, leaving dark streaks of sweat. The brother tried to interview me on camera, asking about the history of the property, previous guest experiences, rational explanations. I heard myself speaking, heard the words coming out in the right order, but I felt disconnected from them, as if I were dubbing over someone else's performance. I talked about altitude sickness, carbon monoxide, the isolation playing tricks on minds accustomed to constant stimulation. I said all the things I had been saying to myself for 2 years. They sounded hollow now, emptied of meaning by repetition and by the weight of those notes sitting in a pile on the kitchen counter. Around 9:30, the audio woman announced that she needed air. She stepped out onto the front porch, and I watched through the window as she stood at the railing, her shoulders rising and falling with deliberate breaths. The darkness beyond the porch lights was absolute, the kind of darkness that exists only in places where humanity has failed to take root, where the night still belongs to something older than electricity. She came back inside after 3 minutes, her face the color of wet paper. When the brother asked if she was okay, she said she'd heard something in the trees. Not footsteps, not yet, but a sound like fabric moving, like something dragging cloth across branches. I told myself it was wind. I told myself there were explanations for everything, and my job was to find them. I told myself these things while my eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the blackness pressed against the glass like a face trying to see in. At 10:47 p.m. the footsteps began. They came from the back of the cabin first, on the porch that wrapped around from the kitchen to the bedrooms. Slow, measured. The creak of old wood under weight that moved with terrible patience. I watched the crew freeze in place, their equipment suddenly forgotten, their training dissolving into something more primal. The brother whispered that it could be an animal, a deer, a bear, something drawn by curiosity or food smells, but he didn't move toward the door to check. None of us did. The footsteps continued around the corner of the cabin, along the side with no windows, and I tracked them by sound alone, my mind painting a picture of something tall and slow, moving through darkness it had long since claimed as its own. When they reached the front porch, directly outside the door we'd entered through hours ago, they stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Silence has texture in a place like this, a thickness that fills your lungs and makes breathing feel like drowning. I could hear the generator's wet heartbeat, the tiny clicks of cooling equipment, the rush of blood in my own ears. I could hear the crew not breathing, holding everything in, waiting. Then the footsteps started again, but this time they were above us, on the roof. The cabin had no second floor, no attic access, no way for anything to reach the roof without a ladder we didn't have. But the sounds were unmistakable, the heavy, deliberate movement of something walking across the wooden shingles, circling, always circling, as if tracing the perimeter of a space it had been circling for years. The cameraman bolted for the door. The brother caught his arm, hissed something I couldn't hear, and after a moment of struggle that looked more like drowning than fighting, the cameraman went still. His eyes were wrong, too wide, showing white all around the iris, the eyes of prey animal that has accepted what is coming. I should have stopped them. I should have insisted we leave, pile into the SUV, drive down the mountain, and never return. But I didn't. Because part of me, the part that had been denying this for 2 years, needed to know. Needed to see something that could be explained, something that could dissolve the growing certainty that I had been renting out a place that did not belong to the world I understood. The woman was crying silently, tears sliding down her cheeks while her hands continued adjusting audio levels, her training overriding everything else. When she spoke, her voice was almost steady. She said the recordings were picking up a second set of footsteps. Inside the walls, sometime after midnight, I had stopped checking the time, stopped trusting numbers that seemed to slip and slide when I looked at them directly. I found myself standing in front of the kitchen counter, staring at the pile of notes. The crew had retreated to the living room, huddled together in the glow of their equipment screens, talking in voices too low for me to hear. The footsteps had stopped an hour ago, but no one had relaxed. You don't relax when something stops hunting you. You wait to see if it's finished, or simply repositioning. I picked up the oldest note, dated June 2016, and read it again. The handwriting was neat, almost architectural, the writing of someone who valued precision. But the words described chaos, described a night exactly like the one I was living through, and ended with a question that I had been avoiding since we found the first note. Who is leaving these for us to find? And why do we keep leaving them for the next person? I don't remember deciding to write. I don't remember finding the pen, or clearing a space at the table, or smoothing out the fresh sheet of paper I must have taken from somewhere. But I remember the words flowing out, my hand moving without consultation from my conscious mind, describing the sunset, the arrival, the notes in the cabinets, the footsteps, the roof, the sounds in the walls. I remember writing, and now I understand that we are not guests here. We are echoes. When the brother found me, I was staring at my own handwriting as if it belonged to a stranger. The timestamp I had added at the top of the page read, October 17th, 2025, 2 years from now. An impossible date that I had written with complete conviction, as if I knew exactly when I was, even though the calendar on my phone insisted otherwise. He took the note from my hands, read it, and I watched the blood leave his face in stages. He showed it to the others, and I saw the same transformation happen to each of them. The dawning comprehension that what we were experiencing had happened before, would happen again, was perhaps happening always. In some fold of time, the cabin had trapped like an insect in amber. The woman checked her recording equipment and went very still. She played back the last hour of audio, and we heard ourselves, our voices, our movements. But underneath them, barely audible, a second layer of sound. Other voices, other footsteps, other versions of us, having the same conversations, discovering the same notes, writing the same warnings that no one would believe. Dawn found us sitting in silence. The notes spread across the table like evidence of a crime no one could prosecute. The footsteps had not returned, but the feeling of being watched had never left. It had simply moved inside, settled into the spaces behind our eyes, taken up residence in the parts of our minds that recognize patterns too terrible to name. We packed in the gray half-light before the sun crested the peaks. No one spoke. No one looked at the notes I had stacked neatly and returned to their hiding places throughout the cabin. The drawer, the closet, the book, the mattress. It felt necessary. It felt like feeding something. I still own the cabin. I still list it. Still collect rent from guests who never stay past the first night. Still receive messages that make less and less sense as the hours after midnight accumulate. I tell myself it's just a building, just wood and stone and glass, subject to the same physics as everything else. But sometimes, when I'm going through paperwork late at night, I find notes in my own handwriting that I don't remember writing. Notes dated weeks or months in the future, describing things that haven't happened yet, ending with warnings that I don't understand until they come true. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear footsteps on my apartment's roof. Slow, circling, patient, waiting for me to come back. I am leaving this so the next person knows they are not imagining it. Story 4. The desert doesn't sleep. It watches. I've driven this same stretch of Highway 95 through Nevada for 11 years now, hauling freight between Reno and Las Vegas 3 times a week. You'd think a man would stop noticing the emptiness after a while, that the vast nothing would become background noise, unremarkable as the hum of 18 wheels on asphalt. But the desert has a way of reminding you it's there, especially in those hollow hours between 2 and 4 in the morning when the rest of the world forgets you exist. It was during one of those hours, about 3 months ago, that I first noticed the black truck. I remember the exact moment because I had just finished my thermos of coffee and was reaching for a stick of gum when my eyes drifted to the side mirror. 2 headlights floated in the darkness behind me, perfectly centered in the frame of reflected glass. Nothing unusual about that. Other drivers share the road, even at ungodly hours. What struck me was the distance. The truck sat maybe a quarter mile back, close enough to see clearly, but far enough that its details dissolved into shadow. I watched it for a few miles, waiting for it to gain on me, or fall behind the way traffic naturally does. It did neither. The headlights held their position with mechanical precision, never wavering, never fluctuating. When I accelerated slightly to test it, the gap remained unchanged. When I eased off the gas, letting my speedometer drop 10 miles per hour, those lights maintained their exact distance, as if tethered to my trailer by an invisible cable. I told myself it was coincidence, cruise control. Another driver as bored and tired as I was, simply matching my pace without thinking. These things happen on long stretches of nothing. You find another pair of taillights and follow them like a lifeline through the dark, a silent companionship between strangers who will never meet. But something about those headlights felt different. They were too steady, too deliberate in their unwavering pursuit. And there was their color, a cold, bluish white that seemed somehow older than modern LED technology should allow, as if the light itself had traveled a great distance to reach my mirror. I grabbed the CB radio and clicked the transmitter. The static that answered was thick, almost syrupy, swallowing my voice when I spoke. "Hey, driver behind me on northbound 95. You copy?" Nothing, just that dense, crackling emptiness. I tried again, adjusting the channel, speaking louder as if volume could pierce whatever interference hung in the air. The static remained unchanged, patient, and absolute. When I finally gave up and set the handset down, I could have sworn the hiss took on a rhythmic quality, almost like breathing. The Tonopah truck stop appeared ahead like a mirage of fluorescent light, and I pulled in without hesitation. I needed coffee. I needed to see another human face. I needed to watch that black truck pass by on the highway and prove to myself that it was just another vehicle driven by just another person with just another mundane destination. I parked, climbed down from the cab, and stood in the gravel lot for a long moment, staring back at the road. The highway stretched into darkness in both directions, empty and silent. No headlights approached. No engine sounds disturbed the still air. The black truck had simply vanished, absorbed back into the night as if it had never existed. Inside the truck stop, a tired woman with gray-streaked hair poured my coffee without a word. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sickly pale glow that makes 3 in the morning feel like a fever dream. I sat at the counter and wrapped my hands around the warm cup, trying to shake the unease that had settled into my bones. 45 minutes later, I was back on the road, the truck stop shrinking in my mirrors until it disappeared entirely. The coffee had helped. The brief contact with another living person had helped more. I was starting to feel foolish about my earlier paranoia when I glanced at the side mirror and felt my stomach drop. The headlights were back. Same distance, same cold, bluish glow, same impossible steadiness. I hadn't seen it pull onto the highway. I hadn't noticed it gaining on me from behind. It was simply there, occupying the exact same position it had held before, as if it had been waiting for me to return. That night established a pattern that has repeated itself without variation for the past 3 months. The black truck appears in my mirror sometime after midnight, holds its distance for hours, and vanishes whenever I stop. It never passes me. It never falls behind. Radio contact remains impossible, drowned in that thick, breathing static. And every time I think I've finally lost it, every time I convince myself that the previous sighting was a one-time hallucination born of exhaustion and isolation, those headlights return. I've tried everything. I've taken different routes, altered my schedule, left at random times. Nothing changes. The black truck finds me. The black truck follows. I started documenting the sightings, thinking that if I recorded enough details, I might find a rational pattern, some explanation rooted in the mundane mechanics of coincidence. I noted times, locations, weather conditions. I tried to capture photographs, but my phone camera struggled with the darkness, producing only blurry smears of light that proved nothing. It was during one of these documentation attempts, about 2 weeks ago, that I made the discovery that finally cracked something loose in my understanding of the world. I was scrolling through my camera roll, looking for any halfway decent image of those distant headlights, when I passed a photograph I had taken 3 years earlier in Sacramento. It was a simple shot. Me standing outside a diner, visible in the reflection of a large window, grinning at my own image like an idiot. I had taken it to send to my ex-wife, proof that I was eating actual food on the road instead of living on gas station snacks. I almost scrolled past it. My thumb was already moving to the next image when something in the reflection caught my eye. Behind my grinning figure across the street sat a truck. Black. Featureless. Its shape distorted by the glass but unmistakable. I stared at the screen for a long time, my coffee growing cold on the dashboard beside me. The rational part of my brain offered explanations. Coincidence, similar trucks, the fallibility of memory. Black trucks are common. I probably saw it parked there that day and simply forgot, my subconscious filing it away until recent events dredged it back up. But something compelled me to keep looking. I started scrolling backward through my photos with a growing sense of dread, examining backgrounds and reflections I had never paid attention to before. The truck appeared again in a photo from Phoenix 18 months ago. I had taken a picture of a cactus garden outside a rest stop, and there it was in the chrome reflection of a nearby car's bumper, a dark shape that matched the proportions of what had been following me. I found it in a 2-year-old picture from Flagstaff, visible through a storefront window I had photographed because of a misspelled sign that had made me laugh. I found it in a picture from Denver, nearly 4 years old, reflected in a puddle behind me as I stood on a rain-slicked sidewalk. The further back I searched, the more I found. The black truck appeared in photograph after photograph, always in reflections, always positioned behind me, always maintaining what seemed like a consistent distance even in frozen moments captured years apart. It was never the focus of any image. It lurked in the margins, in the backgrounds, in the spaces I had never thought to examine. The oldest photograph containing its reflection was from 6 years ago, a picture I had taken of myself in a hotel bathroom mirror in Salt Lake City, documenting a black eye I had received from a trucker whose parking space I had accidentally stolen. Behind me, visible through the bathroom's small window, a sliver of the motel parking lot was visible. And there, unmistakable despite the compression and blur, sat a black truck. I'd never seen it before that first night 3 months ago. I'd never noticed it in any of these photographs. But there it was, preserved in digital amber, evidence of a pursuit I hadn't known was happening. That discovery changed something in me. Sleep became difficult, then nearly impossible. I started seeing the truck everywhere, or thinking I did. A dark shape in a parking garage, a shadow that seemed to hold a familiar form. I would spin around, heart hammering, and find nothing but empty space and the concerned stares of strangers. I began to question my own memory. Had the truck really not appeared in my mirrors until 3 months ago, or had I simply not noticed it? Had I been watched for 6 years without realizing it, blind to a presence that had been documenting itself in the backgrounds of my life all along? Or was I losing my mind, seeing patterns in random noise, connecting unrelated black trucks into a narrative that existed only in my increasingly fragmented psyche? The worst part is the silence. In horror movies, monsters make sounds. They growl, they screech, they announce themselves with the crash of breaking glass or the creak of floorboards. But the black truck offers nothing. No engine roar, no horn, no radio contact. Just those headlights, hovering in my mirror like eyes that never blink, watching without explanation or demand. Last week I tried something new. I pulled over to the shoulder of the highway, stopped completely and waited. If the truck was following me, it would have to stop too or pass by. Either option would tell me something. I sat in my cab for 45 minutes, engine idling, watching the road behind me. The headlights were visible in my mirror when I stopped, maintaining their usual distance. They didn't move. They didn't grow closer or further away. They simply held their position, as if time itself had frozen for whatever sat behind that wheel. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I climbed down from the cab and started walking back along the shoulder, toward those stationary lights. The desert night pressed against me, cold and vast and utterly silent. My boots crunched on gravel that seemed too loud in the stillness. I walked for what felt like forever, but couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. The lights never grew closer. No matter how many steps I took, The distance between us remained unchanged, as if I were walking on a treadmill while the rest of the world scrolled past. I stopped. The lights stopped, and then slowly, they began to recede. Not because the truck was moving backward, but because the darkness was somehow swallowing the space between us, stretching it like taffy until the headlights were nothing but pinpricks on the horizon. I don't remember walking back to my truck. I don't remember starting the engine or pulling back onto the highway. My next clear memory is arriving at the Las Vegas distribution center at dawn, my hands shaking so badly I could barely sign the delivery paperwork. Tonight, I am parked at a rest stop just outside Beatty, writing this account on my phone because I need to put it somewhere outside my own head. The black truck is out there. I can see its lights in my side mirror, patient and eternal, waiting for me to return to the road. I have started to believe that I am never alone, that I have never been alone. Not since long before I first noticed those headlights 3 months ago. The photographs prove it, or they prove that I am capable of constructing elaborate delusions from random visual noise. Both possibilities terrify me equally. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if the distance closed, if one night those headlights began growing larger in my mirror, approaching instead of following, finally revealing whatever has been watching me all these years. Would I see a driver? Would I see a face? Would I see anything at all behind that glass? Or just more darkness, more absence, more of the nothing that Nevada is made of? I think, perhaps, that the distance is the point. That something out there wants me to know it's watching, but has no intention of ever catching up. That the torment is not a means to an end, but the end itself. An eternal pursuit with no resolution, no confrontation, no escape. Just those lights in my mirror, night after night, forever. I'm going to get back on the road now. I have a schedule to keep, a delivery to make, a life that insists on continuing regardless of what follows in my wake. The black truck will be there. It always is. But lately, I have started to notice something new. Sometimes, in the moments before sleep finally claims me at the end of a long haul, I catch my own reflection in the dark screen of my phone, and I could almost swear, that there are lights behind me, small and distant and cold, but there, as if the pursuit has found a way inside, as if the distance has collapsed to nothing, as if whatever has been following me on the road has learned to follow me everywhere. I don't know what is real anymore. I don't know if I ever did. All I know is the highway, the darkness, and the lights that never waver, never approach, never leave. The distance behind me has become my only constant, and I am starting to suspect it always was. Story 5. The house smelled like someone else's memories. Stale lavender, yellowed paper, and something underneath it all that I couldn't name but that made me think of hospitals, of waiting rooms where no one ever receives good news. I signed the lease anyway. After 18 months of lawyers, of splitting furniture and photographs down the middle like Solomon's judgment, of sleeping on my brother's couch while pretending I wasn't falling apart, I would have signed a contract written in blood if it meant having walls of my own again. The rent was suspiciously cheap for a 3-bedroom Victorian in even the smallest Pennsylvania town, but I told myself that was just the market, just luck finally turning in my direction. The landlord was a woman in her 70s with hands that trembled when she passed me the keys, 2 brass ones for the front and back doors, and nothing else. She explained the terms in a voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear her. Utilities included, month-to-month arrangement, no modifications to the property. And then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned the basement. "It stays locked," she said. "Safety reasons. The foundation is unstable. You understand." I understood that I didn't care. I had no intention of storing anything in a damp basement anyway. I nodded, signed where she pointed, and watched her drive away in a sedan that seemed to dissolve into the gray October afternoon. The first night, I unpacked exactly 1 box, the one containing my coffee maker, a mug, and a bottle of whiskey, before exhaustion claimed me. I fell asleep on the bare mattress I'd dragged into the master bedroom, still wearing my shoes, and dreamed of nothing at all. I woke at 3:47 a.m. to the sound of chains, or the particular frequency of silence in a town where no one honked their horn or shouted in the street. But by the end of that first week, it stopped 3 feet ahead of me, as if the darkness were solid, as if it were pushing back. The air rising from below was cold and thick, and carried that nameless smell I'd noticed when I first entered the house, but concentrated now, amplified, almost organic. I counted 17 steps. The house above me had no business having 17 steps worth of basement beneath it. The ceiling should have stopped me at 12, maybe 13. Instead, I descended into a space that my rational mind insisted could not exist. The basement was enormous. My flashlight revealed a concrete floor that stretched beyond its reach in every direction, punctuated by support columns that cast shadows too long for their size. And along the walls, on metal shelving units that seemed to extend into infinity, were boxes. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each one identical. White cardboard, the size of a shoebox, with a handwritten label on the front. I approached the nearest shelf with the slow, mechanical movements of a dreamer. The first box I examined was labeled with a date, November 3rd, 2024, tomorrow's date. Beneath the date was a description. Coffee mug, broken handle, left side. I opened the box. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a coffee mug. My coffee mug, the one I'd unpacked on my first night. The one with the chip on the rim that I'd been meaning to throw away. But this mug was different. The handle had snapped off on the left side, a clean break that hadn't happened yet. I set the box down with hands that had begun to shake. The next box was dated November 7th. Wristwatch, stopped at 3:47 a.m. The next, November 15th. Photograph, torn in half, upper portion only. December 2nd. Wedding ring, inscription visible. January 19th. Eyeglasses, left lens cracked. I moved down the shelves in a kind of trance, reading dates that advanced through the winter and into spring, through summer and into a fall that hadn't arrived yet. And then, on a shelf near the far wall, farther than I should have been able to walk, farther than the lot line of the property, I found the boxes with my name on them. Not my full name, just my first name, handwritten in the same careful script as all the others, followed by a date. The first one was dated 3 weeks from now. I didn't open it. I couldn't. My hands had stopped responding to my commands, and my legs had begun to tremble with the effort of keeping me upright. Behind me, I heard footsteps on the concrete floor. I spun around, my flashlight cutting wild arcs through the darkness, but there was nothing there, nothing I could see. The shelves stretched on in every direction, and the darkness between them seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The whisper was louder now, not following me anymore, but surrounding me, coming from the boxes themselves, from the objects inside them that hadn't broken yet, hadn't stopped yet, hadn't been lost or forgotten yet. They were whispering to each other about the futures they contained, about the moments they were waiting to occupy. I ran. I took the stairs 3 at a time, slammed the basement door behind me, and didn't stop moving until I was outside, standing in the overgrown backyard with frost forming on the grass, and my breath coming in ragged gasps that tasted like rust. The key was still in my hand. I thought about throwing it into the woods, burying it, destroying it somehow. Instead, I put it in my pocket. That was 3 days ago. I've been back to the basement twice since then. I tell myself I'm gathering information, looking for patterns, trying to understand. The truth is simpler and more shameful. I need to know what's waiting for me. The boxes are organized chronologically, but not by the events they describe. They're organized by when I'll first encounter the objects inside them. A pair of reading glasses I haven't bought yet, dated for next April. A letter I haven't written yet, crumpled and tear-stained, dated for the following October. A house key I don't recognize, scratched and bent, dated for a winter 2 years from now. I've started keeping a list. Every object I own, every item I touch throughout the day, cross-referenced with the dates in the basement. The coffee mug broke this morning, exactly when the label said it would. I wasn't even surprised. I watched it fall from my hand as if from a great distance, watched the handle snap off on the left side, watched the future arrive right on schedule. The whisper has changed since I opened the door. It doesn't follow me anymore. It waits for me, pooled in corners and gathered beneath furniture, patient and almost companionable. Sometimes I think I can make out words in it. Not warnings exactly, but invitations. A voice that sounds like it could be my own, older and more tired, telling me about the objects that are waiting, about the dates that are approaching, about the basement that keeps growing. Because it is growing. I'm certain of that now. Every time I descend those impossible stairs, the shelves have extended further into the darkness. New boxes appear overnight, labeled with dates that keep pushing forward into years I might not live to see. And the boxes with my name on them. There are more of them each time I look. A collection of moments I haven't experienced yet, accumulating like sediment at the bottom of a lake. Last night, I found a box dated for next week. Inside was a key, brass, ornate, identical to the one I found behind the kitchen board. The label read, "Basement key, replaced." I've been sitting with that one for hours, turning it over in my mind. Replaced. The word suggests intention. It suggests a cycle. It suggests that someone, or something, has done this before, will do this again, is counting on me to continue the pattern. I should leave. I should pack what little I own and drive until the gas runs out and find a new town, a new house, a new life to fail at. But I keep thinking about the boxes with my name on them, about the futures they contain, about the specific and inevitable shape of the days I have left. If I leave, do the boxes disappear? Do the dates change? Or is the basement simply waiting somewhere else, patient and comprehensive, cataloging the objects I'll break in a different house, a different town, a different version of this same long surrender? The real question, the one I can't stop asking, is this: was the basement here before I arrived? Or did I bring it with me? Because I keep thinking about those 18 months before the divorce was final. The way time seemed to stretch and compress without warning. The nights I lost to whiskey and grief, whole weeks I can't account for. The feeling, persistent and inexplicable, that I was being watched even in my brother's cramped apartment, even in the courthouse hallway, even in the shower with the water running and the door locked. Maybe the basement has always been with me. Maybe it grows wherever I settle, cataloging and collecting, filling itself with the objects that will define my decline. Maybe the woman who rented me this house knew exactly what she was doing when she handed me the keys and mentioned the foundation, the instability, the safety reasons I should have asked about but didn't. Or maybe, and this is the thought that keeps me awake at night, the thought that tastes like rust and lavender and hospitals, maybe I'm the one in the box. Maybe I'm the object, carefully labeled and shelved, waiting for a date that's already been written on my forehead in a handwriting I'd recognize as my own if I could see it. The whisper is louder tonight. It's forming words now. I'm almost sure of it. My name, repeated at intervals that match my breathing. An invitation or an incantation or simply a record of what's already happened, already been cataloged, already been stored in a white cardboard box somewhere in that impossible space beneath the floorboards. Tomorrow, I'll go back down. I'll find the box with next week's date, the one with my name on it, and I'll finally open it. I'll see what object defines that particular moment, what breaking or stopping or losing is waiting for me just around the corner of the calendar. I'll find out if knowing changes anything at all. The key is in my pocket, warm against my thigh, and I swear I can hear it whispering too. Story 6. The fog rolled in at 9:47 p.m., though I only remember that detail now because the digital clock above my register froze at that exact moment. It hadn't worked properly in weeks, but something about seeing those red numbers locked in place, unblinking, made my throat tighten. I told myself it was just the cold. November, in this stretch of highway between nothing and nowhere, had a way of seeping into everything. The booth, the glass, the marrow of your bones. I had been working the night shift at the Kellerman Pass toll station for 3 years. 3 years of headlights bleeding through darkness, of license plates from states I'd never visit, of hands reaching out from car windows to drop exact change into my palm. The highway was a secondary route, mostly forgotten since the interstate opened 40 miles east. Some nights I'd count fewer than 20 vehicles. Most of those were truckers who knew the back roads, or locals cutting through to the county line. That night, the fog was different. It didn't drift or curl the way fog usually does. It sat, heavy, oppressive, like something had exhaled it from deep underground, and it simply refused to move. The sodium lights above the toll lane created a sickly orange halo that extended maybe 15 feet before dissolving into that white nothingness. Beyond it, I couldn't see the road. I couldn't see the fields. I couldn't even see the rusted shell sign half a mile back that usually glowed like a distant star. I was reading a paperback, some thriller I'd picked up at a gas station, when I heard the engine. Not the sound of an approaching car, but the sound of one already there, idling. I looked up, and my breath caught. The car sat in my lane as if it had materialized from the fog itself. A black sedan, old, 1940s, maybe 1950s, with chrome trim that should have gleamed but somehow absorbed the light instead. The headlights were off. The engine purred with a rhythm that felt almost organic, like breathing. I leaned forward, trying to see through the windshield, but the glass was dark, nearly opaque. I waited for the window to roll down, for a hand to emerge. Seconds passed, then a full minute. I pressed the intercom button. My voice came out hoarse, strange to my own ears. I asked if they needed help with the toll. The driver's side window descended slowly, mechanically, and I saw him. He was pale, not sick pale or scared pale, but pale in a way that suggested he had never known sunlight. His features were sharp, angular, like someone had carved them from soap and forgotten to smooth the edges. He wore a dark suit, charcoal or black, with a white shirt buttoned to the throat. No tie. His hair was slicked back, colorless in the bad light. But it was his eyes that made me grip the edge of my counter. They were fixed on me with an intensity that felt physical, like fingers pressing against my chest. He extended his hand through the window, palm up, and dropped a collection of coins onto the metal tray. I heard them land, a dull, wet sound, like stones falling into mud. When I looked down, I saw they were rusted, corroded, stamped with images I didn't recognize. Faces that weren't presidents. Symbols that might have been letters in an alphabet I'd never seen. I should have said something. Should have told him I couldn't accept whatever currency this was. But my mouth wouldn't form the words. He spoke then, and his voice was like static given shape. He asked me how long I'd been working here. 3 years, I managed to answer. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. Then he asked about my apartment, the one bedroom above the hardware store in town. He described the water stain on my ceiling, the one shaped like a hand reaching for something. He mentioned the photograph I kept in my nightstand drawer, the one I hadn't looked at in months because looking at it hurt too much. I asked him how he knew these things. I demanded it, though my voice cracked like a teenager's. He smiled. It wasn't a human smile. The muscles moved correctly, the lips pulled back, but there was nothing behind it. No warmth, no malice, nothing at all. He said I would understand soon enough, that I had been doing good work, that I had been helping people find their way, even if I didn't know it. And now, he explained, others would come. They would tell me what they were running from, and eventually, I would learn what was coming for me. The window rose before I could respond. The black sedan pulled forward slowly, impossibly slowly, and dissolved into the fog as though it had never been there at all. I looked down at the rusted coins in my tray. When I touched one, it was ice cold and left an orange residue on my fingertips that I couldn't wash off for days. The first of them arrived 2 nights later. It was a woman in a gray station wagon, mid-50s maybe, with the kind of face that had once been pretty and was now just exhausted. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. When she pulled up to my booth, she was crying, not sobbing, just a steady stream of tears running down her cheeks, as though she'd been doing it so long she'd forgotten to stop. She asked if this was Kellerman Pass. I confirmed it was. She exhaled, a sound of such profound relief that it made my stomach turn. She told me she had finally found it. The man had told her she would find it. She had driven for 2 days straight, following directions he'd given her in a diner outside of Tulsa. She described him exactly: pale, dark suit, eyes like dead televisions. He had sat across from her in a booth and told her that if she could just make it through this toll, she would be safe. The thing following her wouldn't be able to cross. I asked her what was following her. Her face changed then, collapsed into something between terror and despair. She told me she didn't know what it was. She only knew when it was near. The lights would flicker. The air would taste like copper. And she would hear footsteps behind her, always behind her, even when there was no one there. It had been following her for 11 years, since the night she survived the car accident that took her husband. She was supposed to die, she whispered. Something was angry that she hadn't. She paid her toll, normal money this time, crumpled bills, and drove through. I watched her taillights shrink and vanish into the darkness. I never saw her again. I don't know if that means she made it to safety, or if it means something else entirely. More came after that. 3 the first week, then 5, then more than I could count. A man in his 30s who hadn't slept in 16 days. An elderly woman who kept looking in her rearview mirror even while talking to me. A young man, barely old enough to drive, who told me he'd been hearing his own voice speaking to him from empty rooms, saying things he was going to do before he did them. But the voice was always slightly wrong, always describing a version of events that was darker, crueler than what actually happened. They all had the same story. The man in the dark suit had found them. He had told them about the toll. He had promised them that crossing it was their only chance, and they all asked me the same question before driving through. Had he told me yet? Had he explained what was coming for me? I started keeping a notebook. Dates, descriptions, the fragments of their stories that I could piece together. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I thought if I could find a pattern, I could make sense of it. Maybe I thought I was documenting evidence of something: a cult, a shared delusion, a con artist preying on traumatized people. But the notebook didn't help. The patterns didn't emerge. The only constant was him, the pale man in the dark suit, offering the same impossible promise, sending them all to my booth. The changes started slowly enough that I almost didn't notice. The first was the sound. I began hearing footsteps on the gravel outside my booth, soft, deliberate, circling. But whenever I looked, there was nothing. Just the fog, always the fog, which seemed to grow thicker each night. I told myself it was animals. Deer, maybe. Coyotes. Then the lights started flickering. Not the overhead sodium lamps, but the small fluorescent tube inside my booth. It would sputter and dim at random intervals, casting my workspace in strobe-like flashes. I replaced the bulb twice. The flickering continued. The taste came next. Copper. Faint at first, like I'd bitten the inside of my cheek. But it grew stronger, especially late at night. Especially when the fog pressed close against my windows. I would run my tongue along my gums, searching for blood, and find nothing. I stopped sleeping well. When I did sleep, I dreamed of the toll booth, but wrong. In the dreams, the road didn't exist. The booth sat alone in an endless gray void, and cars would approach from the horizon, one after another, their headlights like eyes, their engines like breathing. I would collect their tolls, and the coins were always those rusted ones, and my hands were always stained orange. And somewhere behind me, I could hear footsteps. I started seeing things in my peripheral vision, shapes in the fog, a figure standing just beyond the reach of the lights, watching. But when I turned to look, there was nothing. Or rather, there was the sense of something having just moved, just retreated, as though it had been there a moment before and would be there again the moment I looked away. I called in sick for 3 days. I stayed in my apartment, curtains drawn, doors locked. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't check my mail. I sat on my couch and listened to the silence and tried to convince myself that I was having a breakdown, that the isolation of the job had finally cracked something in my mind. But on the 3rd night, I heard it. A knock at my door. Soft, patient, the sound of knuckles against wood, over and over. with a rhythm that felt almost musical. I didn't answer. I sat frozen, barely breathing, watching the door. The knocking stopped, and then I heard footsteps, not outside but inside, in my hallway, moving slowly toward the living room. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember running. I only remember being in my car, driving, the highway unspooling beneath me like a black ribbon, and somehow, without deciding to go there, I ended up at the toll booth. It felt safe. It felt like the only place that made sense. The fog wrapped around it like a cocoon, and the orange light glowed like something holy, and I sat in my chair and watched the road and waited. He came again at 9:47 p.m. The clock, still frozen, seemed to pulse with a light of its own. The black sedan emerged from the fog like a memory surfacing from deep water. This time, I wasn't afraid. I was tired, so profoundly tired, and fear requires energy I no longer had. The window descended, his pale face appeared, those empty eyes fixed on mine. He told me I had been doing such good work, all those people I had helped through, all those souls who had escaped, at least for a little while, because of me. I was a gatekeeper, he said, a threshold, and every threshold needs a guardian. I asked him what was coming for me. My voice was steady. I didn't recognize it. He tilted his head, that inhuman smile spreading across his face. He told me to look in my booth, really look. He told me to check beneath the counter, in the space where I stored my paperback novels and my thermos of coffee. He drove away before I could respond. I sat there for a long time. Minutes or hours, time had become unreliable. Finally, I looked. Beneath the counter, tucked into the corner I had never thought to examine, I found a notebook. Leather-bound, old, its pages yellowed and brittle. I opened it and saw handwriting, cramped, desperate, filling every margin. It was my handwriting. The entries were dated. They went back decades. They described the toll booth, the fog, the pale man, the endless stream of terrified travelers. They described the footsteps, the flickering lights, the taste of copper. They described the growing certainty that something was watching, waiting, circling ever closer. The last entry was dated 3 years ago, the night I started working at the toll booth, the night I thought was my first shift. It read, "He told me I could escape if I crossed the toll. He said someone would take my place." I don't remember anymore if that was a lie or if I just don't want to remember the truth. The fog is so thick tonight. The footsteps are getting closer. I can hear them in the booth now, right behind me. I'm going to turn around. I have to know what's been following me all this time. Below that, in handwriting that was mine but not mine, someone had added a final line. "Don't turn around." I felt it then. A presence. Not behind me. That would have been too simple. It was everywhere. In the fog. In the walls of the booth. In the spaces between my thoughts. It had always been there, I realized. I had always been here. Outside, the fog pulsed. The sodium lights flickered and dimmed. Somewhere in the distance, or perhaps somewhere very close, I heard the sound of an engine. A car approaching. Another traveler, sent by a pale man in a dark suit, desperate to cross a threshold they didn't understand. I reached for the notebook again, my hands moving without my permission, and I began to write. The date at the top of the page was 3 years from now, and in the fog, something that might have been footsteps, or might have been my own heartbeat, began to circle the booth once more. Story 7. The forest remembers. I know that now, though I wish I didn't. I wish I could go back to the comfortable ignorance of my first season here, when the trees were just trees and the trails were just dirt paths carved through wilderness. But you can't unknow things. You can't unsee what the fog reveals. I've been a guide at this park for 3 years. 3 years of leading groups through old-growth timber, explaining the life cycle of Douglas firs, pointing out elk tracks in the mud. 3 years of answering the same questions about bears and cougars, of radioing the station when someone twisted an ankle, of sleeping in the same cabin at the edge of the eastern boundary. I thought I understood this place. I thought the mountains had accepted me. But there are parts of the park that don't appear on any map I've seen issued to visitors. Parts that the senior rangers mention only in passing. Their voices dropping to something quieter than a whisper, more like an exhalation, as if even speaking too loudly might attract attention. And there's one trail in particular, a route that winds up toward a ridge that shouldn't exist according to topographical surveys that nobody talks about at all, until the signs appeared. It was a Tuesday in late October when I first noticed them. The morning had arrived wrapped in that particular Pacific Northwest gray that makes it impossible to tell where the sky ends and the mist begins. I was doing my usual perimeter check, making sure the trail markers along Route 7 hadn't been damaged by the previous night's windstorm, when I saw a post I'd never encountered before. The sign was wooden, dark with moisture, and the carved letters spelled out a name I'd heard whispered exactly twice in my time here. Echo Ridge Trail. An arrow pointed northeast, toward a section of the park I'd been told was permanently closed due to geological instability. The wood looked new, fresh cuts, no moss, the kind of clean edges that suggested it had been placed within the last few days. But what made my stomach tighten wasn't the sign itself. It was the second sign, 20 feet further along, and the third beyond that, each one pointing deeper into the forbidden section. Someone had marked an entire route. I radioed the station. The supervisor on duty, an older woman who'd been here longer than anyone, listened to my description in complete silence. When I finished, she simply said she'd send someone to check it out. Her voice carried no surprise, no curiosity, just a flatness that felt like a door being closed. No one came. I asked about it again the following day, but the supervisor acted as though our conversation had never happened. 2 other rangers avoided my questions entirely, finding sudden urgent tasks that required their immediate attention. Only one colleague, a man who'd been on medical leave for 6 months and was about to transfer to another station, met my eyes. He told me, in that strange, exhaling voice, that some trails have a way of reopening themselves. He said it like one might describe a wound that refuses to heal. I should have listened to the warning buried in his words. I should have understood that some doors, once opened, don't close again the way they should. The footsteps began on the third night. I woke at 2:47 a.m. I remember the exact numbers glowing red on my clock, to the sound of someone walking across my cabin's front porch. The boards creaked in a steady rhythm, back and forth, like someone pacing. I lay still, barely breathing, listening as the sound continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it stopped, directly in front of my door. I waited for a knock, for a voice identifying themselves as a lost hiker or a fellow ranger. Instead, I heard something far worse. My own name, spoken in a tone that almost resembled my mother's voice. If my mother's voice had been filtered through static and distance and something that had forgotten how human vocal cords were supposed to work. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Eventually, the pacing resumed, and then faded into the forest. The next morning, I found footprints in the mud around my cabin. Dozens of them, all different sizes, circling the structure in patterns that made no logical sense. Some prints walked up to the walls and simply ended, as if whoever made them had stepped directly through the wood. Others emerged from nowhere, beginning in the middle of the clearing with no approach tracks. I told myself it was a prank. Some of the younger seasonal workers had a reputation for hazing, and I convinced myself this was an elaborate initiation I'd somehow missed during my first years. But when I mentioned the footprints at breakfast, the other rangers stared at their plates and said nothing. One of them, I noticed, had started wearing a small pouch around his neck, the kind that usually held religious medals or protective charms. The voices came again that night, and the night after. Sometimes they called my name in that wrong mother tone. Sometimes they sounded like colleagues asking for help, their words muffled as though spoken through layers of wool. Once, I heard what sounded like an entire group of hikers moving through the trees near my cabin. their conversations just below the threshold of comprehension, punctuated by occasional laughter that rose and fell like something trying to remember what joy sounded like. I stopped sleeping with the lights off. I started checking the locks 3 times before bed, then 4, then 5. My hands trembled when I poured my morning coffee. In the mirror, I watched my face grow pale and drawn, shadows deepening beneath my eyes like bruises. On the 7th night, I decided I had to know. I told no one I was going. I left at dawn, when the fog was thickest, and followed the signs that shouldn't have existed toward the trail that shouldn't have been open. My pack held the essentials: water, food, a flashlight, my radio, a compass, and a camera I'd brought to document whatever I found. Proof, I thought. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The trail began innocuously enough. For the first mile, it could have been any path in the park. Packed dirt, occasional exposed roots, the ubiquitous carpet of fallen needles that muffled every footstep. But as I climbed higher, things began to change in ways I struggled to articulate. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Not the absence of sound exactly, but a quality to the quiet that felt active, purposeful, as if something were absorbing noise rather than simply lacking it. My footsteps, which had crunched softly at the trailhead, now made no sound at all. When I called out experimentally, a simple hello, the word seemed to travel only a few feet before dying. The colors shifted next. The greens of the forest, already muted by the overcast sky, took on a grayish cast that reminded me of old photographs, of things seen through cataracts. Even my own hands, when I held them up, looked faded somehow, less substantial. I checked my compass. The needle spun lazily, unable to find north. I tried my radio. Static. Not the clean hiss of an empty frequency, but something layered and textured, almost like voices speaking in a language that predated words. I should have turned back then. Any rational person would have. But rationality had become slippery, hard to grasp, and something deeper than logic was pulling me forward. Curiosity, perhaps, or something wearing curiosity's mask. The trail marker appeared around the next bend, a wooden post with a carved arrow, identical to the ones near my cabin. I noted my position, made a mental map of the landmarks around me. A distinctive boulder shaped like a crouching animal, a dead tree with a lightning scar running down its trunk, a small stream crossing the path. Then I continued. 20 minutes later, I found another marker, the same crouching boulder, the same scarred tree, the same stream, though I hadn't crossed any water going back. I had returned to the exact spot I'd left. I tried again, this time keeping careful count of my steps, noting every turn. 500 paces later, the marker appeared again. Same boulder, same tree, same impossible stream. The forest was looping. I don't know how many times I walked that circuit. Enough that the gray light began to fade towards something darker. Enough that my legs ached and my water bottle emptied, and my thoughts started to fragment into jagged, unconnected pieces. At some point, I stopped walking and simply stood, staring at the trail marker, waiting for something to make sense. That was when I noticed the carvings. The post wasn't just marked with a directional arrow. Below it, scratched into the wood with what must have been fingernails or stones, were initials, dozens of them. Some weathered almost to illegibility, others relatively fresh. Each set was accompanied by a date. I recognized some of the initials. A ranger who'd transferred suddenly 6 years ago, claiming family emergency. Another who'd taken early retirement after a single season, refusing to discuss his time here with anyone. And others I didn't know, stretching back decades, the oldest dates belonging to people who would have been here before I was born. The most recent carving bore initials I knew all too well. They were mine, my own initials, in my own handwriting, dated 3 weeks from now. I don't remember dropping to my knees, but that's where I was when the fog began to thicken around me. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches interlocking overhead like fingers, and in the space between their trunks I began to see shapes. Not figures exactly, but suggestions of figures. Outlines of people who stood motionless, watching, their edges blurring into the mist. I tried to speak, to ask who they were, what they wanted, but my voice had joined the silence, swallowed by that hungry quiet. One of the shapes moved. It stepped forward, and for just a moment before the fog shifted, I saw a face. A familiar face. My own face, older and thinner, wearing an expression of profound exhaustion. Its lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, and it raised one hand in what might have been a wave, or might have been a warning. Then the fog closed in completely, and I was alone with the trees and their terrible memory. I found my way back. Somehow, I have fragments of the return journey, glimpses of the trail unwinding behind me, the sound of my own breathing harsh and ragged, the gradual return of color and noise as I descended toward the boundary of the forbidden section. By the time I reached my cabin, full dark had fallen, and my body was shaking so violently I could barely work the door handle. I didn't report what I'd seen. Who would I tell? What words would I use? The signs had vanished by morning, of course. The trail entrance was overgrown again, as if nothing had ever disturbed the undergrowth. When I checked my camera, hoping for proof, the memory card was empty. But I still have the mud on my boots. I still have the scratches on my arms from branches I don't remember pushing through. And I still have the dreams that come every night now. Dreams of walking a trail that loops forever, of seeing my own face among the watchers, of reading my initials carved into wood that's been standing since before I was born. The footsteps still come to my cabin. The voices still call my name in tones that almost sound right. But now sometimes I recognize them. Now I hear myself among the chorus, speaking from somewhere I haven't been yet, calling to someone I haven't become. The transfer paperwork sits on my desk, half completed. Every day I tell myself I'll finish it. Every day I find reasons to wait, because leaving would mean never knowing what's actually happening on that ridge. It would mean abandoning the guides who came before me, whose initials are carved into that impossible post. And sometimes late at night, when the voices are loudest, I wonder if leaving is even possible anymore. I wonder if the trail has already claimed me, if the date next to my initials is approaching like a tide, inevitable and patient. I wonder if the face I saw in the fog was a warning from some future version of myself, or an invitation. The forest remembers, and I'm beginning to think it remembers me from a time that hasn't happened yet. Tomorrow maybe I'll follow the signs again, just to check, just to see if they've changed. The fog is already gathering at the tree line, and somewhere in its depths, I can hear footsteps that sound exactly like my own. Story 8. The walls in this building are thin enough to hear a whisper, thick enough to swallow a scream. I learned this my first night here, lying awake on a mattress that still smelled of the previous tenant's cigarettes, listening to the symphony of strangers living their compressed lives all around me. Footsteps above, television murmurs below, the occasional flush of pipes like the building's arterial system pumping waste through its ancient veins. But from the apartment to my left, Unit 4C, nothing. An absence of sound so complete it felt deliberate, as if the silence itself were listening. That was 3 weeks ago, before the knocking began. The first time I heard it, I convinced myself it was the radiator. February in New York had turned the city into a frozen gray prison, and the building's heating system groaned and clanked like a dying animal. The sound came at 2:17 a.m. I know the exact time because insomnia had become my unwanted companion, and I'd taken to watching the red digits on my alarm clock as if they might reveal some secret about why sleep had abandoned me. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. I pressed my palm against the wall, separating my bedroom from 4C. The plaster was cold, almost wet feeling, though when I pulled my hand away, my skin was dry. I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings make old sounds. I'd moved here from a newer complex in Queens after losing my job, downsizing my life to fit my dwindling savings. This place was cheap for a reason. The knocking came again the next night. Same time, same pattern. 3. Pause. 3. But now, there was something else beneath it. A low, rhythmic scraping, like fingernails being dragged slowly across wood. I lay rigid in my bed, counting the repetitions. 12 sets of 3 before it stopped. 36 knocks total. I didn't sleep until dawn painted the walls a sickly yellow. By the end of the first week, I'd cataloged the patterns. The knocking wasn't random. It followed a structure I couldn't quite decode. Sometimes it was 3-3-3. Other nights, it shifted to longer sequences, 3-5-2 or 7-1-4. The scraping came and went, but the moaning started on night 8. I don't know how else to describe it. A low, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the wall itself, as if the building's bones were humming with some terrible frequency. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't mechanical either. It occupied a space between the two that made my teeth ache. I went to see the building superintendent on day 9. He was a heavy-set man with watery eyes and a permanent sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the cold. His basement office smelled of mildew and neglect. He listened to my complaint with the practiced patience of someone who'd heard 1,000 grievances and cared about none of them. When I finished, he shook his head slowly and told me that 4C had been empty since October. The previous tenant had left suddenly. He used that word, suddenly, with a strange emphasis, and the unit was scheduled for renovation. No one had been inside in months. He was certain. I asked if I could see for myself, just to put my mind at ease. His refusal was immediate and strangely forceful. Building policy, he said. Liability issues. But something flickered in his eyes when he spoke. A recognition, perhaps, or a warning he couldn't quite articulate. He suggested I buy earplugs. White noise machines were helpful too, he added. Then he turned back to his newspaper, and I understood I'd been dismissed. The patterns grew more complex. I started keeping a notebook, transcribing each sequence as it came through the wall. 3-3-3 became 3-5-2, became 7-1-4, became something longer, something that felt almost like language. I'd lie awake with my ear pressed against the cold plaster, scribbling numbers in the dark, my handwriting growing increasingly erratic as the nights wore on. It was my neighbor across the hall who first noticed the change in me, an elderly woman who shuffled to the mailboxes each morning in the same faded housecoat. She stopped me in the corridor one afternoon, her hand surprisingly strong on my arm, and asked if I was feeling all right. I looked unwell, she said. Thin, pale. Was I eating? I told her I was fine, just having trouble sleeping. She studied my face for a long moment, then leaned closer. She whispered that she'd heard things too, years ago, when she first moved in, from 4C. But she'd learned to ignore them. That was the trick, she said. You had to ignore them, no matter how much they wanted your attention. Then she released my arm and shuffled away, leaving me standing in the corridor with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects. I began responding on the 15th night. I don't know why. Perhaps the sleep deprivation had eroded whatever rational barriers normally governed my behavior. Perhaps I simply needed to know that something real existed on the other side of that wall, even if that something was terrible. The sequence that night was 3-2-3. I waited until it finished, then raised my fist and knocked back. 3-2-3. The silence that followed was different, charged, expectant. Then came the response. 4-1-4. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I knocked again, repeating the new pattern. 4-1-4. The answer came immediately. 5-3-5. We continued like this for nearly an hour, the patterns growing longer and more intricate. I filled 3 pages of my notebook before exhaustion finally claimed me. When I woke the next morning, my knuckles were raw and bruised, and I had no memory of falling asleep. The communication evolved over the following week. I began to perceive meaning in the sequences, not words exactly, but intentions, emotions. The 3-3-3 that had started everything felt like a greeting now, or perhaps a test. The longer patterns carried weight, urgency, and the moaning that accompanied them had shifted in tone, becoming almost plaintive, almost pleading. I stopped going outside. The winter sunlight hurt my eyes, and the noise of the city felt like an assault after the intimate silence of my apartment. I called in sick to the temp agency that occasionally threw work my way. I let my phone die. The only thing that mattered was the wall and what waited behind it. On the 22nd night, the pattern changed completely. It came faster than before, almost frantic. 272727, repeated over and over. I knocked back, trying to match the rhythm, but something was wrong. The moaning had returned, louder now, and beneath it I could hear something else. Scratching, not the slow scrape of fingernails, but something more desperate. Something trying to get through. I pressed my ear against the wall and listened. The scratching stopped. The moaning faded. And then, very clearly, I heard breathing. Not through the wall. From the wall. As if the plaster itself had developed lungs, I scrambled backward, knocking over my nightstand in the darkness. The breathing continued, slow and measured, somehow synchronized with my own panicked gasps. When I finally managed to turn on the light, the wall looked exactly as it always had. Cracked beige paint, a water stain in one corner, nothing more. But I could still hear it. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the far corner of my bedroom, watching the wall, waiting for something to emerge. The warnings began on night 24. The patterns had become a language I could almost understand. Not in any logical sense. I couldn't translate them into English. But I could feel their meaning the way you feel a dream slipping away upon waking. And what they communicated was simple. Leave. 313131. Leave. 224422. While you still can. 55555. Before we make you stay. I tried to ignore them, as my elderly neighbor had suggested. I bought earplugs, then headphones, then a white noise machine that hummed and crackled through the night. Nothing helped. The knocking came through everything, vibrating in my chest, my teeth, the base of my skull. It was inside me now, part of my own biological rhythm. The warnings grew more specific. One night, the sequence seemed to describe the layout of my apartment, the distance from bed to door, the number of steps to the bathroom, the exact dimensions of my closet. Another night, it mapped my daily routine. When I woke, when I ate, how long I spent staring at the wall between communications. They knew everything. They had been watching. I went back to the superintendent on day 26. I must have looked unhinged. I hadn't shaved in over a week, and my clothes hung loose on my dwindling frame. I demanded access to 4C. I told him I would break down the door myself if necessary. He stared at me for a long moment, something like pity, mixing with the fear in his watery eyes. Then he reached into his desk and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it across to me without a word. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all of the same wall, the wall adjoining my bedroom seen from the other side. But in these images, the plaster was covered with markings, symbols, patterns, the same sequences I'd been transcribing in my notebook for weeks, carved deep into the surface in what looked like frantic, desperate strokes. The timestamp on the earliest photo was October of last year. I asked him what had happened to the previous tenant. He took back the folder, his hands trembling slightly. The man hadn't died, he assured me. He was simply elsewhere now, a facility upstate. He'd started hearing things too, started responding. And then one morning, maintenance had found him inside 4C, even though the door had been locked from the outside and no one had a key. He'd been carving patterns into the wall, he said, for hours. His fingers had been worn down to the bone. I asked the superintendent how the man had gotten inside. He shook his head and told me that was the wrong question. The right question was how to get out. It is now 2:47 a.m. on the 29th night. I am writing this at my desk, which I have pushed into the corner furthest from the wall. The knocking started 20 minutes ago, a new pattern I don't recognize, something complex, something final. I have packed a bag. My keys are in my hand. In a few minutes, I will open my front door and walk down the corridor and out of this building, and I will never return. But there is a problem. When I turn toward the door, I see it. The wall, the one separating my apartment from 4C, has moved. Not much, perhaps 6 inches. but the room is smaller now than it was when I sat down. The distance to the exit has grown. The knocking continues. I respond without thinking, my fist finding the rhythm automatically. 333. The old greeting, the original test. The answer comes immediately, and this time I understand it perfectly. Not through logic, through something older. Something that bypasses language entirely and speaks directly to the animal brain, the part of us that still remembers how to be prey. You learned the pattern, it says. Now you are part of it. I try to stand, but my legs won't cooperate. The wall breathes. The distance to the door stretches. The knocking builds to a crescendo, and beneath it, I hear my own voice. My own voice. Coming from the other side. It is calling my name. It is welcoming me home. They found this manuscript on the desk in apartment 4B, 3 days after the tenant was reported missing. The room showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. The wall separating 4B from 4C had been torn open from the inside, revealing only darkness beyond. No body was recovered. The building superintendent declined to comment, citing liability concerns. Unit 4B is currently scheduled for renovation. It has been vacant since March. Sometimes, late at night, the new tenants in 4A report hearing knocking through their walls. They describe it as rhythmic, almost like a code. They have started knocking back. Story 9. Windshield wipers couldn't keep up with the rain. I had been driving for 11 hours straight, my eyes burning from the hypnotic blur of taillights and the endless drone of tires on wet asphalt. The GPS had glitched somewhere around Midland, rerouting me through a maze of farm roads that seemed to lead nowhere. By the time I realized I had missed my exit, the storm had swallowed the highway whole, reducing visibility to a few feet of gray, nothing. That's when I saw the sign, a pale rectangle emerging from the downpour like a half-remembered dream. Vacancy. No name, no logo, just that single word flickering in neon pink against the black Texas night. I told myself I had no choice. The rational part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive through 20 years of traveling sales routes across the Southwest, insisted this was simply survival. Find shelter, wait out the storm, leave at first light. But there was something else, something I didn't want to acknowledge. A pull, almost magnetic, as if the motel had been waiting for me specifically, as if it had always been there, just beyond the edge of my awareness, patient and inevitable. The parking lot was empty save for a single pickup truck, its paint faded to the color of old bone. The motel itself was a low, sprawling structure, the kind built in the 60s and forgotten by every decade since. A covered walkway connected a dozen rooms to a small office, and the rain drummed against the corrugated metal roof with the insistence of fingers tapping on a table. I grabbed my overnight bag and ran for the office door. The woman behind the counter looked up before the bell above the door had finished chiming. She was older, 60, maybe 70, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes the color of dishwater. She smiled, and something cold slithered down my spine. She said my name. Not, "Can I help you?" or "Rough night out there." She said my name, first and last, as if greeting an old friend who had finally come home. I stood frozen in the doorway, rain dripping from my jacket onto the cracked linoleum. I hadn't shown her my license. I hadn't said a single word. Yet she was already sliding a key across the counter. An actual metal key, not a card, and telling me that room 7 was all ready, just the way I liked it. I asked her how she knew who I was. Her smile didn't waver. She told me I had been here before, a long time ago. She said some guests just had a way of coming back, whether they remembered or not. Her voice was soft, almost grandmotherly, but there was something beneath it. A weight, a certainty that pressed against my chest like a hand. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her I had never been to this stretch of highway in my life, that I had never seen this motel, that something was very wrong and I was going to leave right now, storm be damned. Instead, I took the key. Room 7 was at the far end of the walkway, its door the same faded green as all the others. The key turned smoothly, as if the lock had been recently oiled, and the door swung inward on silent hinges. The smell hit me first, old paper and dust, with an undertone of something sharper, something chemical. The room was small but clean, dominated by a queen-sized bed with a mustard yellow comforter and a nightstand that held a lamp with a water-stained shade. A television from another era sat on a dresser, its screen dark and curved like a dead eye. Heavy curtains covered the single window, and when I pulled them back, I saw only my own reflection staring back at me, distorted by the rain streaming down the glass. I dropped my bag on the bed and noticed the nightstand drawer was slightly open. Inside, I found a Bible, standard motel fare, and beneath it, a notebook. The notebook was old, its cover made of cracked brown leather that had softened with age. There was no title, no label, nothing to indicate what it contained. But when I opened it, I felt the room grow colder, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in an instant. The pages were filled with handwriting. Different hands, different pens, different inks. Blue, black, faded brown that might once have been red. Dozens of entries, maybe more, each one dated and written in the first person. The first entry was from 1987. The man described arriving at a motel during a rainstorm after missing his exit somewhere in West Texas. He described the woman at the front desk who knew his name before he spoke. He described the key to room 7, the smell of old paper, the drawer that was slightly open. He described finding a notebook. I read faster, my heart beginning to pound against my ribs. Entry after entry, year after year. 1992, 1998, 2004, 2011, 2019. Each one telling the same story with minor variations. A traveling salesman, a wrong turn, a storm, a motel that didn't appear on any map, the woman who smiled and spoke their names like incantations, the room that smelled of dust and secrets, the notebook waiting in the drawer like a message in a bottle from a ship that had never been found. Every man described exactly what I was experiencing. Every detail matched. The flickering neon sign, the pickup truck in the parking lot, the key that felt too cold in my palm. Some entries were longer than others, filled with speculation and fear and desperate attempts at rationalization. Others were brief, almost clinical, as if the writers had already accepted something I was only beginning to understand. But there was one thing none of them mentioned. None of them wrote how they left. I flipped through the pages again, searching for some indication of an ending, a resolution, a simple, I checked out the next morning and drove away. But every entry simply stopped, mid-thought or mid-sentence, as if the writers had been interrupted, as if something had made them put down their pens, as if something was about to make me put down mine. I dropped the notebook and went to the door. The handle wouldn't turn. I pulled harder, rattling the door in its frame, but it held firm. I checked the lock. It wasn't engaged. The deadbolt was open. There was no reason the door shouldn't open, and yet it remained sealed, as immovable as if it had been welded shut. The window was worse. When I tried to lift it, the frame didn't budge. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to see beyond my own reflection, but the rain had become a solid wall of water, obscuring everything beyond the narrow walkway outside. I could hear it drumming on the roof, a constant percussion that seemed to be growing louder, more insistent, as if the storm was trying to get in. The television turned on by itself. Static filled the screen, a blizzard of gray and white that cast dancing shadows across the walls. I hadn't touched the remote. I hadn't touched anything, but the static seemed almost purposeful, patterns emerging and dissolving in the chaos like faces trying to form, but never quite succeeding. I turned it off. The static remained for a moment, flickering, before the screen went dark. Then the phone rang. It was an old rotary phone, the kind I hadn't seen since I was a child, sitting on the nightstand where I could have sworn there hadn't been a phone before. The ring was shrill, mechanical, cutting through the white noise of the rain like a scream. I let it ring. 3 times, 4, 5. On the 6th ring, I picked it up. The voice on the other end was familiar. It was the woman from the front desk, but different. Younger somehow. Or maybe just a recording that had been made decades ago. She told me that checkout was at 11. She told me not to worry, that everything would make sense soon. She told me to add my entry to the book. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I should have been terrified. Part of me was a deep, primal part that recognized danger in the way an animal recognizes the scent of a predator. But there was another part, a strange calm settling over me like a blanket of snow that felt almost resigned, as if I had known, on some level, that this moment was coming, as if I had been waiting for it my entire life. I sat down on the bed and picked up the notebook again. The entries I hadn't noticed before seemed to leap out at me now, small details I had missed in my initial panic. The man from 1998 mentioned a photograph on the wall, a black and white image of a group of men standing in front of the motel. He counted 12 men in the photo. The man from 2011 mentioned the same photograph but counted 15. The most recent entry, from 2019, said there were 23. I looked up. There was a photograph on the wall across from the bed, small and easy to miss, hung in a simple wooden frame. I hadn't noticed it when I came in. I was almost certain it hadn't been there. I stood and walked toward it, my footsteps silent on the thin carpet. The photograph was old, its edges yellowed and curling. It showed the motel in what might have been the 1960s, the building newer but recognizable, the neon sign bright and whole. A group of men stood in front of the office, their faces serious, their bodies arranged in neat rows like a class picture. I counted them. 27. And one of them, second row, third from the left, was me. Not someone who looked like me, not a coincidental resemblance. It was my face, my build, my distinctive way of standing with my weight shifted slightly to the left. I was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, my hair cut shorter than I kept it now, but the face was unmistakably mine. The man standing next to me in the photograph was looking directly at the camera, but his eyes seemed wrong somehow. Too dark, too deep, as if they weren't eyes at all but holes cut into the paper, revealing nothing behind them. I stumbled backward, my legs hitting the bed, and sat down hard. The room was spinning, or maybe I was spinning, the walls breathing in and out like the chest of some massive sleeping creature. The rain continued its assault on the roof, but now it sounded different. Not rain at all, but footsteps. Hundreds of footsteps marching in unison toward some destination I couldn't see. The notebook lay open on the bed beside me, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A blank page at the end, waiting. A pen had been placed beside it, a simple ballpoint pen that I was certain hadn't been there moments ago. The entries in the notebook weren't warnings, they were records. Documentation. A ledger of arrivals, each guest adding their name to a list that had been growing for decades. And the photograph on the wall wasn't a coincidence or a trick, it was a promise. Evidence that everyone who came to this place eventually became part of it, absorbed into its history like water into sand. But absorbed how? And where did they go when their entries stopped mid-sentence? I picked up the pen. I didn't want to. Every rational thought in my head screamed at me to throw it across the room, to try the door again, to break the window if I had to. But my hand was moving on its own, guided by something outside myself, and I watched as the pen touched the blank page. I began to write. I wrote about the rain and the wrong exit. I wrote about the woman who knew my name and the key to room 7. I wrote about the notebook and the photograph and the phone call that came from somewhere outside of time. I wrote about the growing certainty that I had been here before, that I would be here again, that this room was a trap that existed in the space between one moment and the next. The words flowed effortlessly, as if they had been waiting inside me all along, just needed the right conditions to emerge. And as I wrote, I understood something that made the pen falter in my hand. The entries didn't stop because the writers were interrupted. They stopped because the writers finished. They wrote everything they needed to write, everything the motel required of them, and then they became part of the place itself. Another face in the photograph, another voice in the static, another set of footsteps in the rain. The room was growing darker despite the lamp on the nightstand. The walls seemed closer than before, the ceiling lower, the air thicker and harder to breathe. I could feel something watching me, Not the woman from the front desk, not the men in the photograph, but something else. Something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. I stopped writing. The pen hovered over the page, a drop of ink forming at its tip like a tear. I had written almost everything. Almost. There was only one thing left to document. One final detail that would complete my entry and seal my fate. How I left. But I hadn't left. I was still here. Still sitting on this bed. Still breathing this stale air. The story wasn't finished. And as long as it remained unfinished, I was still myself. Still separate from the motel and its collection of lost travelers. I closed the notebook. The darkness recoiled, just slightly, as if surprised. The pressure in the room eased by a fraction. The watching presence drew back, not gone, but waiting, wondering what I would do next. I didn't know how to leave. The door was still sealed, the window still fixed. The storm still raged outside with no sign of stopping. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not complete my entry. I would not give the motel what it wanted. I would sit here until morning, until the rain stopped, until something changed. And if nothing changed, if I was trapped here forever, suspended between one sentence and the next, then at least I would remain myself. At least I would not become another face in the photograph, another voice in the chorus of the lost. The notebook lies on the bed beside me, closed but not forgotten. The pen is on the floor where I dropped it, its ink slowly seeping into the carpet like blood into soil. The rain continues to fall, and the television flickers occasionally, patterns almost forming in the static before dissolving back into chaos. I am writing this in my own journal, the one I keep for work notes and personal thoughts. Not in the motel's notebook, not in its ledger. This account is mine, separate from the trap, a message to whoever might find it. If you are reading this, you are likely in room 7. You have likely found the notebook in the drawer. You have likely seen your face in the photograph on the wall. Do not finish your entry. The motel wants your ending, your resolution, your final period at the close of the final sentence. It feeds on completed stories, on travelers who believe they have documented everything and have nothing left to give. Leave your story unfinished. Stay in the space between. And whatever you do, do not answer the phone when it rings at dawn. I can hear it beginning to ring now, a soft, distant trill, growing louder with each passing second. The light outside the window is changing, the black giving way to a gray that might be morning or might be something else entirely. I will not answer. I will not complete my entry. I will remain here in the space between the last word and the final period, for as long as I possibly can. Because I think I finally understand the truth about this place. The motel doesn't trap travelers. It collects authors, and every story needs an ellipsis. Story 10. The ocean doesn't forget. That's what the old divers told me when I first started working maintenance on the rigs. Men with sun-cracked skin and eyes that had seen too much darkness beneath the waves. They said the Gulf remembers everything that sinks into it. Every ship, every body, every secret. I used to think they were just trying to scare the new guy. Now I understand they were trying to warn me. It started 3 weeks ago during a routine inspection of the subsea manifold on Platform 12. Visibility was poor that morning, maybe 15 feet at best. The water thick with particulate matter that swirled in my helmet lights like dirty snow. I was 90 feet down, checking the integrity of the pipeline connectors, when my radio crackled with something that wasn't my topside supervisor's voice. At first, I thought it was interference. We get that sometimes when the weather's bad or when passing vessels hit certain frequencies. But the weather was calm, and there were no ships in the area. What I heard wasn't static. It was whispering. Numbers, coordinates. A string of digits repeated over and over in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well, distorted and wet, as if the speaker were drowning while they spoke. I tried to respond, to ask topside if they were receiving the same transmission, but my supervisor's voice came back clear and confused. He heard nothing unusual, just my breathing, just the ambient hum of the equipment. I wrote down the coordinates on my dive slate without thinking, some automatic reflex taking over my hand. When I surfaced and checked them against our operational maps, they pointed to a location 2 miles northeast of the platform, an area marked as empty ocean floor. Nothing there, nothing worth noting, nothing at all. I should have thrown that slate into the water and forgotten about it. For 3 days, the coordinates burned in my mind like a brand. I couldn't sleep without seeing those numbers behind my eyelids, glowing faintly in the darkness like bioluminescent creatures drifting through my dreams. My supervisor noticed my distraction during briefings, asked if I was feeling all right. I told him I was fine. I told myself I was fine. On the 4th day, I requested a solo checkout dive. Standard procedure for equipment testing, nothing that would raise flags. I told the dive coordinator I needed to verify a sensor reading near the eastern anchor point. He logged it without question. We trust each other down here. We have to. I swam northeast instead. The descent into that unmarked territory felt different from any dive I'd ever made. The water seemed to thicken around me, not with sediment, but with something else. A presence, a pressure that had nothing to do with depth. My gauges read normal, but my body knew something was wrong. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to return to the familiar geometry of pipes and platforms and human engineering. But my arms kept pulling me forward. My fins kept pushing, as if I were a puppet on invisible strings. I found the structures at 120 feet. They rose from the seafloor like the ribs of some enormous creature, curved metal beams arranged in a pattern that defied any industrial logic I knew. Rust had consumed most of their surface, but beneath that oxidized skin, I could see they were old, impossibly old. The alloys looked wrong, their composition unlike anything used in modern offshore construction. Algae and barnacles had colonized every inch, creating a living shroud that pulsed gently with the current. But it was the symbols that made my blood turn cold. Carved into the metal at regular intervals, they formed a language I didn't recognize. Couldn't recognize. Not company markings, not navigational codes, not any system of notation I'd encountered in 15 years of commercial diving. They were arranged in spiraling patterns that seemed to shift and crawl at the edges of my vision, though when I looked directly at them, they held still. Some were circular, others angular, and a few appeared to be combinations of both, as if 2 different alphabets had been merged into something new and terrible. I reached out to touch one and my radio screamed. The same voice from before, but louder now, clearer, speaking directly into my skull rather than through my earpiece. It wasn't giving coordinates anymore. It was saying something else, a word repeated over and over, a word that had no equivalent in any language I knew, but whose meaning I understood with perfect, horrifying clarity. Return. I fled. I don't remember the ascent, don't remember decompression, don't remember anything until I was back on the platform, ripping off my helmet and gasping for air that tasted wrong. Too thin, too dry, as if I'd been breathing something else entirely down there. That was 17 days ago. The voice hasn't stopped. It's there when I close my eyes, a constant murmur beneath the threshold of conscious hearing, like someone whispering through a wall. During the day I can almost ignore it, can almost pretend it's just tinnitus or stress, or the normal auditory hallucinations that come from spending too much time in pressurized environments. But at night, in my bunk with the darkness pressing against my eyelids, it becomes impossible to deny. The worst part is the sensation that accompanies it. The feeling of water pressure on my skin, even though I'm lying in a dry bed. My body remembers the depth, the cold embrace of the Gulf, and it craves it now in a way I can't explain. When I dream of sinking, of descending past the light into regions where no human was meant to go. And in those dreams, the structures are waiting for me, their symbols glowing with a cold luminescence that calls to something buried deep in my brain. My supervisor has noticed the changes, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I flinch at sudden sounds, the hesitation before every dive, the lingering looks I cast toward the northeast horizon. He pulled me aside yesterday and asked if I needed to talk to someone. The company shrink, maybe, or the chaplain who visits the platform once a month. I told him no. What would I say? What? That I'm hearing voices? That something beneath the water is calling my name? He'd have me on the next helicopter back to shore, marked unfit for duty. My career over. So I keep diving. I keep performing my inspections, checking the pipelines, verifying the structural integrity of equipment I no longer trust myself to evaluate. And every time I descend, I feel it pulling at me, the northeast, the structures, the symbols, like a fishhook embedded in my chest. 3 days ago, I found something that made everything worse. I was in the platform's archive room, a cramped closet filled with outdated survey documents and geological reports that nobody reads anymore. I don't know what drove me there, the voice maybe, or some subconscious need to understand what I'd found. I spent hours rifling through yellowed papers, scanning faded maps, until I found a survey from 1947. The coordinates matched. According to the document, a team had been sent to investigate what they called an acoustic anomaly in that location shortly after the war. The report was heavily redacted, entire paragraphs blacked out with what looked like military-grade censorship, but I could read enough to understand that they'd found something. Something metallic. Something old. Something that had been there long before any offshore drilling operation, long before anyone had a reason to chart these waters at all. The survey team recommended immediate quarantine of the area and cessation of all exploration. Their final note, scrawled in handwriting that looked rushed, almost frantic, read, "Do not respond to the signal. Do not descend. Do not open." I don't know what they meant by open. I don't know what signal they were referring to, but I know that the coordinates were never listed on any subsequent map, never mentioned in any official documentation, as if someone had deliberately erased them from existence, as if someone wanted them forgotten. Last night, I stopped sleeping entirely. It wasn't a choice. My body simply refused to shut down, kept alert by a fear that had sunk its roots deep into my nervous system. I lay in my bunk and stared at the ceiling, listening to the ambient sounds of the platform, the groan of metal, the distant rumble of generators, the wind howling against the superstructure, and beneath all of it, the voice. It's not whispering anymore. It's speaking in full sentences now, though I can't understand the words. The language is the same as the symbols. Alien, ancient, wrong. And yet some part of me comprehends it, translates it into feelings rather than meanings. Longing, patience, hunger. Something is down there. Something that has been waiting for a very long time. And somehow, I've made contact with it. The thought that terrifies me most isn't that I might be losing my mind. It's that I might not be. What if the voice is real? What if those structures are exactly what they appear to be? Remnants of something that predates human civilization. Artifacts of a presence that existed in these waters before we had words to describe it. What if the 1947 survey team found the same thing I found and covered it up because they understood what it meant? And what if, by following those coordinates, by touching those symbols, I've done something that can't be undone? I'm writing this because I need someone to know. If I don't return from my next dive, if I disappear the way I suspect the 1947 team disappeared, I need there to be a record. The voice is telling me to go back. It's been telling me for days now, growing louder and more insistent with each passing hour. And the worst part, the part I can barely admit to myself, is that I want to. I want to descend again, to swim northeast, to find those structures and trace my fingers over those symbols until I understand what they mean. The compulsion is almost physical, a magnetic pull that makes my hands shake and my breath catch whenever I think about resistance. My supervisor scheduled me for a maintenance dive tomorrow morning. Routine inspection of the wellhead assembly. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. I've already calculated the deviation in my head, the angle I'd need to swim, the time it would take to reach the coordinates, the amount of air I'd have left when I arrived. It would be tight, but possible. I could make it there and back before anyone noticed I'd strayed off course. The rational part of my brain knows this is insane, knows that I should report what I've found, request a psychological evaluation, get off this platform before I do something I can't take back. But that part feels distant now, muffled, like a voice calling from the surface while I sink deeper and deeper into the dark. Tonight, When I close my eyes, I see the symbols. They're not static anymore. They're moving, rearranging themselves into configurations that almost make sense, that hover at the edge of comprehension like a word on the tip of your tongue. And the voice is telling me that if I just go down one more time, if I just touch them again, everything will become clear. I'll understand what's been waiting there all these centuries. I'll understand why it chose me. I'll understand what it wants me to open. The pressure is building in my chest again. That phantom weight of the ocean pressing against my ribs even though I'm sitting in my bunk, dry and safe and surrounded by the sounds of the platform. But the platform doesn't feel safe anymore. Nothing feels safe. The only place I feel like I belong now is down there, in the dark, in the cold, in the silence that isn't silence at all, but the slow, patient voice of something that has been calling through the depths since before humans existed. Tomorrow, I'm going to answer it, sir. I don't know if that makes me brave or broken or something else entirely. I don't know if what I've experienced is a genuine encounter with something beyond human comprehension, or the elaborate hallucination of a mind cracking under the pressure of isolation and depth. But I know this: when I close my eyes, the voice knows my name. It's been whispering it for days now, threading it through the alien syllables, making it part of that ancient language, as if I've always belonged to it, as if I've always been meant to return. The ocean doesn't forget, and now it seems, neither do I. Story 11. The fluorescent lights in B-Wing have a particular way of dying. They don't simply go out. They hesitate first, flickering in a stuttering rhythm that makes the shadows stretch and contract like something breathing. I noticed this on my third night at the hospital, and now, 7 months later, that observation has become the cornerstone of my unraveling. I work the graveyard shift, 11 at night until 7 in the morning, walking the halls of a building that holds 1,200 beds and, after midnight, feels like it holds 12,000 secrets. The job pays well enough for a man with no degree and fewer prospects, and I've always been comfortable with silence. Or I was, before B-Wing started speaking to me in a language I don't understand but somehow recognize. The renovation was supposed to be completed by spring. Structural reinforcement, they told us during the briefing. The east foundation had shown signs of settling, hairline fractures spreading through the concrete like the building was developing wrinkles of age. They closed the entire wing, relocated patients to temporary quarters in the adjacent tower, and brought in contractors who worked for exactly 6 weeks before the funding dried up. Now the wing sits dark and hollow, sealed behind fire doors with magnetic locks, and I'm the only one who patrols its perimeter. That's what the job description says anyway. Perimeter patrol. I'm not supposed to go inside. Nobody is. But motion sensors don't care about job descriptions, and when my radio crackles at 2 in the morning with an alert from corridor B7, I have no choice but to investigate. The first few times I found nothing. Empty hallways thick with the smell of drywall dust and abandoned ambition. Plastic sheeting hanging from ceiling frames like shed skin. The occasional rat, perhaps, triggering the infrared eyes that watched over the construction graveyard. I filed my reports, checked the appropriate boxes, and tried not to think about the way the air felt different in there. Heavier, somehow, as if the wing existed at a slightly lower atmospheric pressure than the rest of the building. Then I found the wheelchair. It was positioned in the exact center of corridor B4, its chrome frame catching the thin beam of my flashlight like a lighthouse beacon in fog. The wheels were angled slightly toward the left, as though whoever had been pushing it had made a final adjustment before stepping away. And it was pointing directly at room B412, a door I knew for a fact had been locked since the evacuation 6 months prior. I stood there for a long time, my breath loud in my ears, watching the wheelchair as if it might move. It didn't. Of course it didn't. Wheelchairs don't move on their own. People move them, and there were no people in B-Wing. The security footage would confirm this. The sensors would have detected anyone entering through the sealed fire doors. I was alone, but I didn't feel alone. I reported the wheelchair to the morning supervisor, a a woman with gray hair and the perpetually exhausted expression of someone who had seen too many strange things to be surprised by any of them anymore. She listened to my account with half an ear, nodding in the appropriate places, then told me the contractors must have left it behind. Simple explanation. Case closed. She didn't ask why it had taken 6 months to appear, or why I'd patrolled that same corridor dozens of times without noticing it before. She didn't want to know. Neither did I, not really. But curiosity is a peculiar affliction. It grows stronger when starved. I began paying closer attention to B-Wing. Not officially, my rounds still followed the prescribed route, the choreographed dance of flashlight and footsteps that kept the insurance adjusters happy. But I started lingering at the fire doors, pressing my ear against the cold metal, listening for sounds that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, in the space between heartbeats, I thought I heard them. Soft impacts, like footsteps, echoing from somewhere deep inside the sealed corridors. The whisper of wheels on linoleum, the subtle click of a door latch releasing, then engaging again. The sensors continued their false alarms. Corridor B7, Room B203, Stairwell B East, always in the dead hours between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the living part of the hospital slowed to a murmur and the darkness pressed against the windows like something trying to get in, or perhaps trying to keep something else from getting out. I started checking the security footage. This was within my rights as a staff member, though the IT technician who showed me how to access the archive gave me a strange look when I specified the dates and locations I wanted to review. B-Wing, overnight hours, the past 3 months. He pulled up the files without comment, but I caught him watching me from the corner of his eye as I scrolled through hours of empty hallways and static frames. The timestamps showed nothing unusual at first. Gray corridors stretching into gray infinity, the emergency exit signs casting their red glow like dying embers. Motion-triggered recording, they'd explained during orientation. The cameras only captured footage when the sensors detected movement. This saved storage space and made review more efficient. What they didn't explain was why the cameras in B-Wing were capturing footage at all. I found myself on the recordings. Or rather, I found my shadow. The first clip was from 3 weeks prior, time-stamped 2:47 a.m. Corridor B6. My flashlight beam swept across the frame, casting long shadows against the plastic sheeting. And there, just at the edge of visibility, a figure moved, humanoid, upright, walking with the deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The resolution was poor, the lighting worse, but I recognized the silhouette, the way the shoulders hunched slightly forward, the particular rhythm of the gait. It was me. It had to be me. Except at 2:47 a.m. on that particular night, I had been in the cafeteria on the 3rd floor of the main building, eating a sandwich and watching the local news on the break room television. The overnight nurse had seen me there. We'd exchanged words about the weather, the exhausting sameness of night shift small talk. I had witnesses. I had an alibi, as absurd as that sounded even in my own head. I watched the footage again, and again. The figure moved through corridor B6 with purpose, disappearing around the corner toward the sealed stairwell, and somewhere behind it, impossible to say how far, the faint outline of wheels caught the dim emergency lighting. The wheelchair, someone was pushing it, someone who looked exactly like me. I stopped sleeping well after that. The 8 hours between shifts became a purgatory of half-consciousness, my mind cycling through explanations that grew more desperate with each repetition. Someone else on staff had my build and my walk. Possible, but unlikely. The footage had been corrupted, the timestamps wrong. Technically plausible, but unsatisfying. I was sleepwalking, losing time, entering B-Wing during blackouts I couldn't remember. Terrifying, but at least it would mean the explanation was mundane, medical, fixable. But none of these theories explained what started happening at home. My apartment is small, a studio on the 4th floor of a building that smells perpetually of cooking oil and laundry detergent. I've lived there for 3 years, long enough to memorize every crack in the ceiling, every stain on the carpet, every angle of light that falls through the single window at different hours of the day. I know this place the way you know your own reflection. So when things started to change, I noticed. The first time, it was the coffee mug. I keep it on the shelf above the sink, handle facing left, because I'm right-handed, and that's the natural way to grab it in the morning. But when I came home after the night I found the wheelchair, the handle was facing right. A small thing, a nothing thing. I must have put it back wrong the day before, distracted by something, my mind already drifting toward sleep. Then it was the books. I don't own many. A few paperbacks, mostly thrillers, stacked on the nightstand in order of when I'd finished them. The one I'd read most recently was on top, its spine cracked and familiar. Except after my next shift, the stack had been rearranged. The book on top was one I'd finished months ago. Its cover faded to a shade of blue I didn't remember. I told myself these were the effects of exhaustion. Night shift does things to your perception, your memory. The circadian disruption alone is enough to make anyone question their grip on reality. I started taking photographs before each shift. The mug, the books, the angle of the blinds, the position of my keys on the hook by the door. Documentation, I thought, evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. The photographs showed me what I expected. What they didn't show was why everything looked slightly different when I returned. The mug in the same position, yes, but somehow the handle's shadow fell at a wrong angle. The books stacked identically, but the nightstand itself seemed to have shifted 3 inches to the left. My keys on the hook, but the hook now mounted a 1/4 inch lower than I remembered. I measured. I compared. I drove myself to the edge of obsession and then a step beyond, and every measurement confirmed what my eyes refused to accept. I was coming home to an apartment that was almost mine, but not quite. A copy with imperceptible flaws. A version of my life that had been reassembled by something that didn't quite understand how the original was supposed to look. The hospital security footage continued to capture my shadow walking through B-Wing. I reviewed every recording, cross-referencing timestamps with my official patrol logs, my break schedules, the swipe records from my access badge. The pattern was consistent. Whenever my shadow appeared in the sealed corridors, I was verifiably somewhere else. The cafeteria, the parking garage, the 3rd floor nursing station, signing paperwork or making small talk with colleagues who could confirm my presence. I was never in 2 places at once. Not physically, but the cameras told a different story. My supervisor noticed the change in me. She asked if I was feeling all right, if the overnight hours were becoming too much, if I needed to speak with someone from the employee assistance program. I assured her I was fine, just tired, just adjusting to a new sleep schedule. She nodded with the mechanical sympathy of someone who had heard this particular lie before and knew better than to challenge it. The truth was something I couldn't articulate, even to myself. How do you explain that you've started to doubt your own continuity? That you walk through your days with the growing suspicion that you might not be the only version of yourself that exists? That somewhere, in the sealed darkness of B-Wing, another you is walking the same corridors, pushing the same wheelchair, and perhaps, coming home to the real apartment while you return to the copy. I began to dread the fire doors. Every patrol brought me closer to them, their magnetic locks humming with the quiet promise of separation, of the boundary between where I was supposed to be and where something wearing my shape had chosen to go. I would stand there, flashlight steady, listening to the sounds that filtered through the metal, the distant creak of settling architecture, the whisper of air moving through empty rooms, and occasionally, always when I was on the verge of turning away, a sound that might have been footsteps. The wheelchair appeared in different locations on subsequent nights. I never saw it move, only found it in new positions. Outside room B418, in the alcove near the defunct nursing station, at the top of the sealed stairwell with its front wheels hanging over the first step. Each time I reported it, each time my supervisor noted the discrepancy with decreasing interest. Contractors, she kept saying. They must have left more than one. But there was only ever one wheelchair. I knew this because I started photographing it, the same way I photographed my apartment, documenting its chrome frame, the worn rubber of its hand grips, the slight rust on the left wheel bracket. It was always the same chair. It was always pointing toward a different door, and then, last Tuesday, I found it pointing at the fire doors from the inside. I don't know how I knew. The doors were sealed, the magnetic locks engaged, the corridor on my side empty and still. But when I pressed my ear against the metal, that gesture that had become as routine as breathing, I heard it. The faint squeak of wheels settling on linoleum, the soft impact of something coming to rest just inches from where I stood. I have not opened those doors. I have not requested access to B-Wing, not even to retrieve the wheelchair that shouldn't be there. I have done nothing except continue my patrols, file my reports, and return each morning to an apartment that feels less like mine with every passing day. The photographs no longer help. What they show and what I see have begun to diverge, a gap that widens with each shift. In the most recent images, the mug is on the shelf where it should be. The books are stacked in their proper order. The blinds are angled at 30 degrees to filter the morning light. But when I look at these same objects in person, I see differences the camera doesn't capture. A hairline crack in the mug's handle, a title on the top book I don't remember reading, blinds that seem to have developed a new mechanism overnight. I've considered the possibility that I'm the wrong version, that somewhere, separated by the thickness of a fire door or the distance of a corridor, there's another security guard who has been living my real life all along, that I'm the shadow, the copy, the reconstruction assembled from imperfect memory, and maybe, each night when I pass by B-Wing, I see myself through the cameras because that other version is looking for a way back. Or perhaps, more terrifying still, because he has already found one, and what walks these halls wearing my face is no longer entirely me. The shift ends in an hour. My badge will record my exit. The cameras will capture me walking to my car, driving through empty streets, climbing the stairs to an apartment that may or may not be mine. Tomorrow night, the sensors will trigger again. The wheelchair will have moved, and I will stand at the fire doors, listening to the sound of my own footsteps on the other side, wondering which version of me is real, and which one has been wandering the wrong corridor all along. Some questions are better left unanswered, but that doesn't stop them from asking themselves, over and over, in the flickering silence of a hospital wing that shouldn't be occupied, in the whispered settle of a building that breathes when no one is watching, in the mirror where my reflection sometimes blinks a half-second too late. I think I'll start checking the cameras again tonight. Not to look for answers, I've given up on those. Just to see if my shadow is still there, walking paths I don't remember taking. And if it is, I wonder, does it ever stop to look at the cameras too? Does it ever wonder where I've gone? Story 12. The cabin had too many windows. I noticed this on my first night, standing in the living room with a glass of whiskey warming in my palm, watching the snow fall in thick curtains beyond the glass. The real estate listing had called it abundant natural light and seamless integration with nature. What it actually meant was walls made mostly of windows, floor-to-ceiling panels that turned the entire front of the house into a mirror once darkness settled over the mountains. I had come to Vermont to write. That's what I told everyone, my editor, my ex-wife, my therapist. After 15 years in a fluorescent-lit office, drowning in spreadsheets and performance reviews, I needed silence. I needed space. I needed to finally put down the memoir I'd been promising myself since my father passed, the one about growing up in his shadow, about the weight of expectations never spoken aloud but always felt. The cabin seemed perfect, isolated. A 40-minute drive from the nearest town, accessible only by a single unpaved road that wound through dense forest. The owner, an elderly woman I'd spoken to only by phone, had been almost too eager to rent it out for the winter season. She mentioned something about the previous tenant leaving early, but I hadn't pressed for details. People abandon all sorts of plans. I understood that better than most. Now, standing in the amber glow of the fireplace, I watched my reflection hover in the dark glass like a ghost. The flames danced behind me, casting shifting shadows across my face. I raised my glass to drink. My reflection raised its glass a fraction of a second later. I froze. The whiskey touched my lips, but I didn't swallow. In the window, the other me completed the motion. The delay so slight I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. A trick of the light. Fatigue from the long drive. The mind playing games in unfamiliar surroundings. I lowered my arm. counted to 3. My reflection lowered its arm on 2. The fire crackled. Outside wind pressed against the cabin with a low, sustained moan. I stepped closer to the window, close enough that my breath fogged the cold glass, and stared at myself, brown hair going gray at the temples, lines around the eyes deeper than I remembered. 43 years old and looking every day of it. The reflection stared back. Perfectly synchronized now. Perfectly still. I told myself it was nothing and went to bed. The second day brought more snow, and the particular silence that only winter in the mountains can produce. A silence so complete it becomes its own presence, pressing against the eardrums like deep water. I set up my laptop at the kitchen table, positioned so I could see the forest through the windows, and tried to write. The words wouldn't come. Every sentence I typed felt hollow, borrowed, like I was transcribing someone else's memories instead of my own. I deleted paragraph after paragraph, watching the cursor blink in accusation. By noon, I had nothing but a title and a vague sense of failure. I made coffee and stood by the living room windows, watching chickadees flit between snow-laden branches. The sky hung low and gray, promising more snow by evening. The trees stood like sentinels, their dark trunks stark against the white landscape. My reflection watched the birds too. Then it turned its head and looked at something behind me. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Hot liquid splashed across my ankles, but I barely felt it. I spun around, heart hammering, scanning the empty room. The fireplace, cold now, the leather couch, the bookshelves lined with paperbacks left by previous tenants. Nothing. No one. I turned back